The Hex Angels came to my uncle's funeral. What's the nicest thing you've seen a gang do? I ran the after school program at an elementary school in a rough part of town. Our playground was actually a city park, which meant we couldn't do the maintenance on broken equipment and I couldn't kick people out to make it safer for my kids. I'd had problems with some teen and 20-something dickheads drinking and finger banging their meathead girlfriends while the kids were out playing. And goddammit, we didn't deserve to just stay inside because cops didn't patrol. My kids deserved to play. It was frustrating. One day, a couple gnarly old 1%ers approached me while we were outside, which scared me, and asked if I had been having trouble with the neighbors coming around. I told them that it had been pretty rough. One just clapped a hand on my back and said, "Why ain't gonna have that no more, and why ain't gonna have no trouble from us." The next day, a biker was by the basketball court keeping watch while the kids played, and left when we were done. That continued every day for the rest of the school year. Also, the guys who stood watch never smoked or cussed while the kids were out there. I don't condone their activity, but I appreciated their help. That is very cool. It's nice to hear that even rough bikers care to make sure children are alright and have a safe environment to play and enjoy themselves in. The Westboro Baptist Church came to my town to protest President Obama's visit, and to also claim that a massive tornado that killed 161 people in my town just few days prior was deserved for whatever reasons. Luckily, hundreds of bikers and gangs and truckers blocked them in at a gas station and nobody saw them that day. When I was in high school I went on a double date to go see a movie, don't remember which one, and when we came out of the theater we realized that my friend who drove had locked his keys in the car. We spent an hour or so begging cops that we saw in the parking lot to unlock the car for us and every one of them turned us down. Then seemingly out of nowhere this gentleman appears, sees us looking in the window of our car, and asks if he can help us. We explained the situation. He says he can help. Within 15 seconds our car is unlocked. Being amazed high schoolers we just stared in awe at what had happened. Then he leaves us with these parting words. "Today is my first day out of prison. I was in for grand theft auto," and off he walked. My mom got a flat tire years ago, with 3 kids under the age of 5 in the car. Mind you, it was this middle of summer and she had no cell phone. The typical bad butt, long beard biker pulled over and changed the tire for her without a question. She tried to give him money, and his response was just tell everyone a warlock helped you out. Dude. When I was younger, I lived in a relatively bad part of town. I was Asian white, and most of my neighbors were black or Hispanic. I started playing sports at school, and made friends with a number of kids, including this one guy named Thaddeus who was 2 years older than me. Thaddeus was a big, tough kid, but a secret that he kept from a lot of people was that he sang like an angel. He told me once, and sang Kelly's "I Believe I Can Fly," and I've never heard it done better. I swore to him I would never tell a soul and I never did. Thaddeus got involved in some gang activity later on, and I lost touch with him until high school. I was walking home late one night when I was approached by a group of black teenagers who apparently saw me as an easy mark. I wasn't sure whether I was just going to get mugged or was going to get an butt kicking out of it too. I think my membership on the football team was the only thing that saved me from an immediate beatdown, but it wasn't going to end well. Suddenly, I hear a loud "Hey, the frick are you doing? Leave him alone." I look over, and Thaddeus and a couple older, 20 plus, guys are pushing into this circle. Thaddeus throws an arm around my shoulders and says he's cool. "You frick with CMXI, you frick with me." The teenagers dispersed, and Thaddeus made sure I was okay before sending me on my way. I was a bit shook up at the time, so it wasn't until I reflected later that I realized that Thaddeus and all the older guys were pretty obviously strapped, and their status saved me from any trouble for the remainder of my time in high school. Thaddeus sounds like a boss. Professor told us this story while we were on a field trip in Arkansas. He was giving a lesson in the Ozark Mountains at some outcrop on the side of the road when he heard a rumble coming down the road. Next thing he knew there were about 100 rough and tumble Hells Angels coming toward them. As they passed he said the rumble was deafening. Finally the whole crew passed them, when he noticed that the leader of the pack called for a U-turn. As they made the U-turn they approached the class going on and all the bikers brought their bikes to a stop. Not knowing what was going on, my professor asks if he can help them. The leader then proceeded to say that he saw something about geology on the History Channel and was wondering if he could sit in on the lecture my professor was giving. With a laugh my professor obliged and looks back on it as the most rewarding lecture he's ever given. Perks of being a leader: make 100 bikers sit through a lecture to satisfy your curiosity. Nobody says crap. My dad was a biker since I was about 17. He loved riding on his BMW and was always tinkering with one of them in the garage. While he never joined a gang, he was friendly enough to them when they came around to his local bar or when he saw them while on a ride with his buddies. Dad went on cross-country trips, mainly ending up in Wisconsin to visit friends. Fast forward to this past Christmas. My dad died on the 23rd, and we were having his funeral. Mom insisted on him looking proper, though I was holding onto his biker vest. A bunch of bikers came in, a significant number from a gang. I was later told, men rode in the Ohio cold on their bikes in his memory. One in particular came from Wisconsin just to give me a necklace Dad left him to fix up for me. I had this necklace since I was a small child. Dad bought it for me. It broke when I was 14, and I haven't seen it until he brought it back to me, fixed up. TL. DR. Old biker came from Wisconsin to my dad's funeral give me a necklace my dad had him fix for me, that I had since I was a child. These are the kinds of things I like about bikers. Tough and scary, maybe, but you can be dang sure the majority of them will keep their word and they're easy to understand. Don't screw with them, they won't screw with you. 2 good encounters with bikies. The father of a schoolmate was an angel. Despite being an enormous, scary, hairy bear of a man who was constantly covered in leather and stunk of oil and beer, he was a great guy. He always looked after his kids and their friends. When one of my friends got lost on the local mall and he got some mates on buggies to go find him. The second one was more recently. I ride a crappy little 50cc scooter and was at the front of a bunch of cars trying to change lanes so I could turn off the major road I was in after a light change. 2 bikies, not sure which gang there are at town local, saw me struggling with some butthole in a 4x4 not getting ahead or falling back so I could change lanes. These 2 bikies swung in front of him and forced an entire lane to slow down, then waved me in. A lot of those biker gangs can be great guys. They employ the same tactics old time gangsters used, treat the community well so they view you in a more positive light. The bike clubs around here are great. My niece was born with a rare condition and needed several surgeries. That of course insurance wouldn't cover. In the first few years of her life, we had to raise $100,000. The bike clubs came through every time. They are some of the nicest people in the world. Just this weekend I went to an Nights event which raised over $10,000, I think, for children with cancer. They are some of the most caring and charitable people I have ever met. The Yakuza in Japan are known to help with the reconstruction every time there is a tsunami attack. Friendly neighborhood mafia. My uncle used to work with kids and teenagers in inner city Chicago. He helped start a soup kitchen and a school for kids in tough situations. He also used to do gang interventions, trying to get gangs to let a member out or leave someone alone. Things like that. He was a Franciscan and always wore his robes when he went out at night or was expecting trouble. Gang members shot near him or above his head quite a bit, but they always deliberately missed. Other members of his community learned to always venture into dangerous territory in their robes because Chicago gang members just don't shoot Franciscan brothers or sisters. When I was 15, someone slipped acid in my soda at a bar. My stepdad played in a skeezy southern rock cover band, so I spent a lot of time in bars with my parents, helping my mom run the soundboard. I don't remember much about what happened, but at some point a group of ghost ridders gathered around me as I was in a corner rocking back and forth and carried me out to a car and took me home. They made me tea and brought me crackers and basically talked me through it until dawn. My parents stayed at the bar and worked. They just let these bikers take me home and take care of me. 2 of them were convicted felons with violent offenses who had done many years in prison. I've seen and heard of plenty of gangs, bikers, especially, doing good deeds, with the image of a bunch of big, burly, Hairy dudes in leather brewing you a nice cup of Earl Grey really does it for me. I didn't see this personally, but about 20 years ago my mother was a 5th grade teacher in Compton. For those of you who don't know, Compton pretty notorious when it comes to its concentration of gangs and gang violence, especially in the immigrant district, which is where she lived and taught. It was a pretty average night if you heard between 1-10 gunshots. My mom, being the freaking boss that she is, refused to leave the district or teach anywhere else. Anyways, her first year teaching there she had a group of 5 boys, all of them living in destitute poverty. During break, they loved to draw pictures of cars like Lamborghinis and Porsches, all things that they could never afford. They all promised my mom that if they ever got a car, she would be the first person that they would take for a ride. Skipping ahead about 8 years, my mom was leaving the school late after staying to grade some tests. As she was walking to her car, she saw a shady group of boys leaning against a car watching her. She began to walk fast, but they boys got up and began walking towards her. All of them were wearing the telltale blue bandanas, Crips, and my mom said she could see one who was packing a Saturday night special. Anyways, just as she got to her car door, the group of boys reached her. One of them spoke in deep, intimidating voice, "Missus, we are here to take you for a ride." My mom thought she was being kidnapped and reached for her pepper spray. Then another of the group stepped forward and introduced themselves as the 5 boys that she taught about 8 years ago. They squeezed my mom into the backseat of her old, beat-up Cadillac between 2 of the students. They took her to a really fancy restaurant somewhere and paid for her meal in full. Later they took her back to her car, dropped her off, and told her if she ever needed anything to call them, then drove off. TLDR. My mom went out to some fine dining with some Crip members. Apparently your mom is down with the Crips. That's basically the definition of street cred. Not the Hex Angels, but another motorcycle club that my uncle was a member of showed up with hundreds of people after he was killed in an accident, hit by a drunk driver while on his bike. The funeral home was about 5 miles from the cemetery, and I am pretty sure that's how long the procession was. I never had a bad experience with the Angels. After they took over the local red light district, it became a much better place to party. They throw out those who won't behave. They made sure no one is selling bad drugs. Their bouncers are very respectful. Drinks got cheaper and rumor has it the prostitutes got better. This is something rarely pointed out. They make crime clean. They don't want extra attention from bad drugs or buttholes causing violence. Turn it into a sort of hamster dam. Well, this isn't a gang, but certainly a story about a bad butt thug. Where I went to school was pretty middle class white. However, there was one part of town that was kind of rough as it butted up against the rougher town right next to us. There was a kid that went to my school that was a senior when I was a sophomore. He was honestly probably the biggest bad butt in my school. He was about 6'2", 240 pounds. He was all muscle, and in high school he already had a body filled up with prison style tattoos. I know he had spent some time in juvie. One day from a distance I saw some other typical white thug kids kind of taunting a kid with obvious mental handicap issues. I couldn't quite tell what was going on though. A few seconds later I see the actual only bad butt I went to HS with come over and grab one of the guys. I hear him tell the kid to go pick up his freaking cars. The kids kind of scramble and I see they are picking up Hot Wheels all over the locker bay. He then makes the kids apologize to the handicapped kid. They had been kicking his Hot Wheels around the locker bay while he tried to play with them. The mean kids leave and I see the bad butt guy start talking to the kid about Hot Wheel cars. The rest of the school year the bad butt kid would bring Hot Wheels, and for the handicapped kid, they would trade Hot Wheels, talk about Hot Wheels, buy each other Hot Wheels, and even play with the Hot Wheels on the lunch tables. He spent so much time hanging out with this kid and his Hot Wheels. It was one of the most bad butt things I have ever seen. This somehow restored my faith in humanity. In Stockholm, Sweden in 2007, a task force of highly trained officers from the Swedish military police was tasked with hunting down and incarcerating any and all known members of the Werewolf Legion, a gang responsible for most of the sea and cannabis trafficking in Sweden and Finland. My cousin Andres was an affiliate of theirs at the time, operating a rather large marijuana grow-op in Berlin, Germany. Within a span of 8 months, 16 known affiliates to the WL were imprisoned in Sweden. on charges of drug trafficking, extortion, or murder, including Andres' stepbrother, Johan. Johan was being transported to a holding facility in Halmstad, and on the way the police caravan was attacked by gang associates, believed to be part of the Ukrainian mafia. 3 officers were killed in the attack, and 1 was shot in the throat. Instead of running while he had the chance, Johan ripped off his shirt and applied pressure to the wound on the officer's neck with it. He waited with the officer, bleeding profusely from his throat, until the paramedics and police arrived. He was later pardoned of his crimes, which were listed as 2 counts of trafficking, as well as an outstanding warrant for an assault 2 years prior in a bar in Oslo, Norway. TLDR. My cousin's stepbrother, a gang affiliate in Sweden, saved a police officer's life instead of escaping. Man, this is my favorite. Sometimes it really pays to scroll to the bottom of a long thread. Once around noon I was hanging out at a scatter shop when a blood just walked in and started complaining about how all the clothes are blue and how there wasn't enough red. The guy working, who's super cool, just said they would restock and he left. Later that day towards 9 PM my friend, 15, and I, 14, were at our local scatter park. It can get sketchy when a cop rolled by the nearby basketball court. Afraid of whatever a cop might find on them, everyone flooded out and into the scatter park. My friend didn't see any of this happening and checked a text on his new iPhone. All of a sudden 3 guys in their early 20s asked him to let them see his phone to call someone. Take it and run. When he said no, they started to corner him and throw punches. All of a sudden the same blood from the scatter shop that was smoking a joint on a nearby bench ran in, calling them all pussies for jumping a kid, and promptly beat the crap out of them. After they all ran away, he kindly gave my friend $5 for his troubles. TLDR. Nice, but blood helped my friend from getting robbed and gave him $5. Partially relevant. There's a flooded quarry about 30 minutes from my house, and around it is a campground that the bikers own. The cops don't frick with the bikers at all, so they just let us chill on their property, drink as much as we want, blaze as much as we want, and swim all for only $5 a day. It is very kind of them. Fun fact, you're probably swimming in a quarry with a bunch of bodies in it. I was at a gas station one day and pulled up to the pump. Got out and realized that I wasn't close enough to the pump. New car. So I got in, pulled up farther, got out and locked my door, leaving the car on, keys in the ignition, and my then 6-month-old baby in the car. She thought it was hilarious. I called my insurance company. I have roadside assistance through them and they were planning on taking 2 hours. I called the cops, who said they could not help me. Then this guy walks up, sees me in near hysteria, and says he will call his friend to come down with a Slim Jim. It occurred to me as he called his subordinate and commanded him to arrive within the next 2 minutes that this dude was some serious kind of gang member with significant rank. I ignored their need for a Slim Jim as they broke into my car, freeing my still content child and allowing me to make it to work on time. TLDR. I have AAA now. I especially like the TLDR on this one. Oh, another one. I was 19 and stranded in North Miami. I had just locked my keys in my car in a rather unpopulated and shady area. I was a blonde, blue-eyed, extremely white girl, and being as I had not intended to stop in North Miami to begin with, I was just wearing a bikini top and a miniskirt. There was a gang of Hispanic youth in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse across the street from me, just watching me. This was long before cell phones and such. I took a chance and just put on my most confident face and walked over to them and asked if anyone knew how to break into a car and could they help me. They all looked at each other for a second. You could tell they were thinking over all the possibilities. But then one of them shook his head and just walked over to my car and popped my lock with his pocket knife and a piece of wire he found on the ground. Had a similar experience when I was in high school. A news crew was visiting the school and they locked their keys in the van. They ended up asking a couple of the kids who looked like they could have been gang members. They were, if they could get it open, and they did. My uncle told me this story many years ago. He was living in a place beside some Hells Angels. My uncle is a big guy and rides bikes too, but back then he was riding, I believe, a Honda bike. Cruiser type, not a crotch rocket. Anyways, He said the HA guys would come help him fix his bike if they saw him working on it. My uncle loves tinkering with his toys. I guess they would bust his chops a bit for not driving American made, but they were just nice people and enjoyed helping working on bikes. He also said they had really good peanuts and would give him bags full of them all the time. I never understood that last part, but I guess they were in the peanut business. For laundering purposes maybe. He still says they are the best neighbors he ever has had. Respectful, friendly and kind. It should be noted that this is all happened in Canada. Peanuts is another word for H. Your uncle did H. Joking. My biological father was a bandito and was kindly enough to bang my mom so that I could be given the gift of life. Heart of gold, that one. My husband and I tow our camper from Florida to Tennessee twice a year to camp in the Smokies. A good stopping point is an area called Locust Grove, GA. There's a cute overnight RV park close on I-75 and also the most kick-butt Mexican restaurant you'd never guess was in a strip mall where we like to grab a bite and a drink. One night we got in a little late and were finishing up dinner and watching the debut of Favre playing for the Jets on TV at the Mexican place. The game went to the half, and the restaurant was closing up. We asked the waiter if he knew of any place we could catch the second half, and he pointed us to some bar across the interstate. Off we go to a little nondescript place named The Grove, seated in front of your typical interstate motel. There were just a handful of cars in the lot, but it still looked open, so we headed in. The waiter was right. They were showing the game on a big TV, so we grabbed some stools and ordered some beers. I get kind of loud watching football, especially if I've had a few, so I'll let out a few hoots and hollers, and the waitress heads over to see if we want another round. I feel dumb at this point, because I'm in a strange bar with locals being sort of loud, so I apologized to the waitress. She replied in the heaviest, sweetest Georgia drawl, "Baby, you're in a biker bar. You be as noisy as you want," and then went off to get our beers. That's when we took a good look around, and our dumbasses realize we are in a real life biker bar. Like, hardcore. We notice a poker game in the back room. We see the biker flags hanging. We see the bikers at the bar in the shadows. Biker, bar, big time, but also good football game, cold beers, and what feels to be a fairly non-threatening, laid-back environment. So, we stay late, really late, and get to know Kat the bartender, and others seated at the bar, who are all super nice. We got invited back anytime during our travels. In fact, we learned many truckers stay in the parking lot of the Grove because it's convenient and they serve food. Kat told us we could park our rig there anytime, which killed us. Our camper was now a rig and to just call ahead and she'd have a hot meal waiting. She also said it's safer than the RV park, because it's a biker bar, and no one will let you get fricked with if you're our guest. So, we now hit the Grove every time we pass through on I-75 if we can. We learned in later visits that the gang whose bar that is are the Outlaws. They seem very nice. In fact, the last time we were there they were hosting a charity event. A chili cook-off, I think, for kids. TLDR. Suburban couple stops in a bar on the way to go camping to see a football game. Finds out it's a very friendly biker bar belonging to the Outlaws. Goes back twice a year to say hello and have beers. Personally, I hate seeing motorcycle clubs described as gangs. There are many different clubs, lots of different missions and ethics. Honestly though, besides that they are doing it to get brownie points to do their bad things mentality, there are lots of people that have been affected in a positive way by clubs. I was in one, full patched member, for over a year. No, it was not the Outlaws as my username alludes. That's only a playful take on an old nickname of mine. The club I rode with was a national club and was territorial. I can say from experience we put a lot of work into Christmas toy drives, food pantries and real church contributions. Local church helped as a homeless shelter and drug rehab with counseling. I can tell you that not the biggest meanest dude in that club didn't have a tear in their eye watching a 5-year-old boy or girl open a gift they would have never gotten from their parents. Nor did they miss seeing their eyes light up when the doors to the clubhouse were opened and there was a full Thanksgiving meal on spread. The first of many for a lot of those kids. Aside from the gang-related activities, club folks are human. They have hearts, some bigger than others, but they are there. I live right next to a Hex Angel's house kinda thing. It's like their clubhouse anyways. I've always really liked motorcycles, and when I was little asked my grandpa if I could go see theirs. So we walk over there and I asked this big brute of a man if I could see the Harleys, and without skipping a beat, he hoists me up, sits me in front of him, puts the key in the ignition, and start going in circles through the parking lot. I was having a grand old time. And I still visit there to say hi to the guys every month or so. They let me have a shot of Jack sometimes. 3. My mother-in-law was the lead nurse on the orthopedics ward. Every biker in town knew her, and she would stand up to any of them. If they complained, she'd shame them by comparing them to other gangs. She used visiting privileges as a hammer to enforce strict neutrality and a no colors policy. They respected her so much. One day she's driving to work and blows a tire. Total failure. Shredded. Who should pull up to help her but the Sons of Satan, as hardcore a badass outlaw gang as any in the country. They not only put on her spare, they escorted her to work, then repaired her bad tire and put it back on the car. She said being surrounded by dozens of bikers on the freeway acting as an escort was the loudest, but most comforting feeling ever. She sounds like a pretty badass woman. Kudos to her. Students of Reddit, what is your best story about the worst teacher you ever had? I had a second grade teacher who argued with me about how to spell my foreign last name. My chemistry teacher in high school was a total dong. He would tell us if we didn't master chemistry, we should start picking out bridges to live under, and how you'll never get another job outside of chemistry. He would call people out in front of the class that had failed an exam, making several girls cry. The icing on the cake was one day, a larger girl asked him if she could go across campus to grab a notebook or something she left there. He said yeah sure, you could use the exercise. He went on personal leave for the entire year, and never came back. Had an engineering teacher who never graded assignments, pretty much glanced at them, and gave a grade based off how neat it looked, not off creativity. Then every subsequent assignment pretty much got the same grade. My magic number was 88/100. In my engineering class my final exam had 23 questions. Every kid in the class got a percent by multiples of 5, 95%, 90%, 85%, which was impossible with 23 questions. Turns out he never graded them and just gave us a grade on how much he liked us. Professor with tenure showed up, talked about baseball and how he's fluent in Chinese for the first 3 weeks of class, wouldn't give us a syllabus the first month, verbally abused us for not understanding what he hadn't taught us, ran back 2 months of work in the last 2 weeks before the exam, was surprised how much he had to curve the class up to a B average. Even under tenure he can be fired for that. Tenure just means you can't lose your job unless it's proven that you aren't doing it. When I was in the 12th grade I had an English teacher who was horribly picky with essays. Everything else was fine, but essays were very hard to get good marks on with him. I spent 15 hours writing a simple 3-page essay and finished it a few days before the due date so I could have him check it over. He took it home and said he spent about 15 minutes reading it and only checked off a few grammatical. He said the essay was fantastic, but if I fixed those I would get a very high mark. I did. I failed the essay. The same thing happened for the whole year for every essay, so I had to take the course over again in summer school. I had a college professor for physiology that was an arrogant, self-righteous jerk. As finals were coming up, he told us that he wouldn't accept any excuses for being late to the final and that we would fail it if we weren't there at 8 AM. He even told us that it would be a good idea to put the number of a taxi company in our phones in case any of us had car trouble on the morning of the final. So the day of the final, we are all there early, and he walks in 45 minutes late because his wife took his cell phone and his alarm didn't go off. Teacher in high school tried to tell the class that Achilles was a Trojan soldier. I was like no he was Greek. Her no he wasn't. Me yes he was. He fights Prince Hector. Her oh yeah, right. She sent me to the office after class for making her look bad. I got detention for disrespecting her and arguing. The rest of the Iliad lesson after that was watching Troy, not even reading the story. It happens man. I got corrected a few times by students, mind you they were in high school. What's important is how you handle it. I would simply pull my phone out to Google it and thank the student for correcting me, or thank them for trying to correct me. In the 3rd grade we had to do a project that started with a prompt I had a dream that, and I wrote a 2-page story about how I fell into the Harry Potter world and went to Hogwarts for the day. She called a parent-teacher conference and accused me of plagiarism and said I could go to jail for using the Potter characters. This was in 3rd grade. I remember I used to come home crying after her class sometimes, and that was the first time I ever cursed. My mom let me call her a B after a particularly rough day. My 3rd grade teacher was probably the worst teacher I'll ever have. My sister had her before me, so my mom knew how she was when I was treated meanly too. My mom told me I was allowed to say she was a B, but never to her. I'm glad she understood. The teacher wasn't abusive, she was just mean and bitchy. I don't know if she was the worst, but she did pee me off the most. I had a college professor who never once showed up to class on time. It was a MWF class, so only 50 minutes long. She'd regularly show up 30 minutes late, then refuse to dismiss us until her 50 minutes were over. This class was right before lunchtime, so no one had another class to get to, but still. So after the first week of this nonsense, some student said something to her right after she arrived late as usual. The teacher got so furious and personally offended that she kicked the girl out of class and told her to drop the course because she wasn't going to teach someone so disrespectful. WTF do you call showing up to your own class 30 minutes late every day? Because I would call that disrespectful. Ms. Witherspoon. When we had her for 7th grade English, she was quirky, a little overdramatic, but not too outrageous. In 8th grade we watched her have a nervous breakdown. By the time we started 8th grade, we had for 2 periods in a row. We didn't have homeroom, but this was pretty much that. Her mood at the beginning of the year was incredibly tense, and as the year progressed, we started getting more combative against her. She had health problems, so you could write some of her behavior off, but not all of it. Midway through the first semester, things started going off the rails. As an introduction to her book about racism, she had us share every racist term we had ever heard and wrote it on the board, then added 10 more. We never read the book. One day she got tired of teaching and assigned quiet reading for the rest of the class, which was about an hour and a half. About a half hour into it, one person coughed, and another laughed quietly. She then shouted, not very loudly because of her health problems, "Do you think I'm a freaking idiot?" She never explained that. The final assignment she gave us was to read a dozen short stories, followed by a test on those stories. I actually read them all, felt great about the test, and was dumbfounded by the F I'd gotten. The progress report came soon after, and it too showed 2 Fs. We had her for 2 periods, she gave 2 grades. I stole the books the short stories came in from the classroom and took them home to grade the test myself, citing sources and page numbers. On her final day, she wanted us to tell her all of the bad things we'd ever heard about her. She'd been around that school for a couple of decades and was never well liked, so there were a lot of stories. She wept as we told her, but encouraged us to continue. The next day, all of her personal belongings were gone from the classroom, and we never saw her again. There was a substitute for the rest of the year, and she quietly retired during the summer. By the time report cards came out, I had 2s in the class, and, in regrading her final test myself, I found that I got 100%. I kept all the books I stole. Edit, spelling. Second edit. It seems that everyone has a crazy teacher in their pasts. This one was Northern California. I had a math professor from Russia who could barely speak English. He called homework training, and if you didn't understand the problem he would just get mad at you. Growing up, my family was pretty low income. My dad was a bus driver, and my mom worked as a social worker for HHS. My dad's work hours were late night and my mom's early morning, so they hardly got to see each other. We also could never go on vacations because of money and schedule problems. Finally one day, after years of saving, we bought tickets to Disney World, my first official vacation. I still remember to this day how this teacher, 3rd grade, yelled at me that she didn't know how I could have a good time with all the homework she was going to give me. Who goes on vacation during the school year, she was saying. She wound up giving me multiple assignments, including a daily 2-page diary, and daily homework that was way more than what they were even doing in class. My parents were really pissed. They wound up having to get the principal involved. In the end, I still had to do my daily diary. However, all of the other homework was not assigned. Mrs. Rodriguez, if you still exist, I hope you have feasted on many a bag of dongs. In 1960, I was in 4th grade in a public school. As in many schools during this era, we had nuclear attack drills and had to sit under our desks, as if a desk would protect us from a bomb or nuclear fallout. My teacher would make us repeat Bible verses and have us repent our sins as part of the drill to my 9-year-old self. This was terrifying. Well, I'm 62 now and still have nightmares about this. I hate her to this day. Well, going under the desk is mainly to protect from collapsing rubble, and being at floor level under a desk can kind of shield you from broken glass. If the bomb was dropped nearby or on your school, obviously it wouldn't mean crap, but that desk could save a 4th grader's skull from being crushed by a piece of the ceiling. My very first class in high school was English. My teacher was just batshit crazy, condescending, bitchy, just really unpleasant to be around. Her shining moment was the day that she told us that we weren't allowed to drink water in her class because there are many people in our school who are allergic to water, so we have to be considerate of them. I crap you not. I had a teacher in high school who had one of those think as yourself and only yourself you special snowflake mentalities, which is fine to a certain extent, but she took it way overboard. She also taught science, a subject that didn't often support her outlook. For instance, in an effort to get us to think outside the box, she turned the poster of the periodic table upside down, which was great except that I couldn't read the fricking periodic table. We turned in reflections about our labs. How did mixing these solutions make us feel? Then we'd have to connect the experiment to a current event. She's an English teacher now and much happier. This sounds like a story from Wayside School. I had a biology professor who was a former Marine. She barely spoke any English and just seemed crazy. She flipped out on the whole class because she was angry she was getting emails at midnight when she was sleeping. It was an introduction course and she taught it like we were medical students. The class average on the midterm was 32%. I dropped it after that. My graphic design instructor would be dead honest about how she felt about our work, but would also never tell you how to improve. If your work didn't meet her expectations, she would literally write "sucks," "awful," "that's terrible," "terrible choice of color" on our projects. Shortly after, 90% of classmates would stop showing up to her class. Worst part, apparently I was a top student in her class and she would always pick me to judge my classmates' work. I wanted to kill myself. I was a senior in high school, and I had to retake my 10th grade English class in order to graduate. I had a rocky start my freshman and sophomore year. I kicked my butt into gear for my junior and senior year once I realized how important it was. The sophomore teacher was atrocious. She clearly hated teaching and kids. If you were confused and raised your hand to ask a question on what she was teaching that day, she would yell at you to put your hand down. If you waited until after class, she would yell at you to get out. I was so confused at the stature of this woman. I couldn't even fathom at how she became a teacher in the first place. I desperately needed this class in order to graduate, but my final straw came when we had to do a book report on the importance of poetry. I received my book report back after a couple of days, to which she graded it as an F. I spoke to her after class about it, and she said that I was in a 10th grade class, and I needed to write like a 10th grader. She literally gave me an F because the paper was too well written. I took my paper down to the guidance counselor, explained what happened and demanded that I be transferred to a different 10th grade English classroom, and that I wanted her reported. Sorry for such a long rant, but to this day it still infuriates me why someone would choose to be a teacher, and yet not care about their students in any way. We once had a chemistry teacher who always had to tell a black student to stop talking in class. At one point, she got so pissed, she slammed her textbook on the girl's desk, looked her in the eye, and screamed, "You are as disobedient as your color." She was promptly fired. That doesn't even make sense. My math teacher said okay after every 2 seconds. Someone in my class did a tally of how many times she said okay. It was over 224 in one class. Was in 8th grade in middle school. I had just passed a test permitting me to skip up to a 9th grade level math class. This required me to move from 6th period math to 5th period math. thus switching from 5th period science to 6th period science. Went to tell my science teacher and she freaked out and yelled in my face, "You can't do that," because they didn't talk to Emmy. Went straight to the counselor. He approved of the move. My dad had a nice talk with her. Details regarding your dad's conversation with her. First year stats class. I had a prof who was in his last year before retirement and extremely senile. When it came to his lectures, he spent the majority of them talking about fish and fishing, not statistics. Then on his exams, he made the answer key, where all of the correct answers were colored red, and proceeded to print it out as the exam on a black and white printer. Obviously you could see which answers were correct without doing the work, and as a result everyone in the class ended up with 100%. Sounds awesome? No. It was scaled so we all got a B and learned absolutely nothing. TLDR. Statistics prof likes fish and gives away all the answers. Everyone got scaled to a B. Joke's on you. You learned something about statistics from that B. The professor is sitting in a boat right now, fishing of course, chuckling to himself about the whole senile prank he pulled on his statistics class. In high school my favorite teacher, grade 9 biology fell ill and was forced to miss the rest of the year. So we had a substitute for 3/4 of the school year. Now this lady knew absolutely nothing about teaching or biology. She also had a thick accent so it was impossible to understand what she was saying most of the time. The class was out of control, like a freaking zoo. I remember one class some guys in the back broke open a bunch of glow sticks and threw them at the front of the class, spewing neon liquid jizz everywhere. As for me, she hated me. I have no idea why. I wasn't the best student. I didn't really care about the class or subject, but she just despised me, would always call me out for things I wasn't doing and kick me out of class for whispering to my friend next to me. All the while the maniacs in the back are setting fires in the desk. It was insane. During a test one day my pencil became dull and I started fishing in my school bag for my sharpener. She sees my hand rustling around at the bottom of my bag and promptly stands up to walk towards me. This beast wipes the test off of my desk and writes a giant 0 on the paper. I exclaim, but she shuts me up and tells me that I was caught cheating. The students around me all interject telling her that I wasn't cheating. But I had it with this freaking dumbass teacher, so I gave her the finger and walked out of the class. I just couldn't handle another class with her, so I stopped going. I told the principal what happened and explained that until I was able to retake the test I wouldn't be going to the class. My parents got involved and it was a whole freaking brouhaha that was caused by my entitled piece of crap teacher. Eventually there was a meeting between the principal, vice principal, my mother, father, and I. The teacher didn't say crap. She just sat there with her mouth closed glaring at me hoping the principal would back her up. She didn't. I retook the test. Can't remember what I got. I probably failed. Fricker though. You know what you got? Justice. Sweet sweet petty justice. Arguably the best kind. The Crusades happened in the 5th-6th century BC. Me. BC stands for before Christ. Yes. Me. The Crusaders were Christian. Yeah. 5th-6th century BC. I just stopped arguing because it was useless. I'd love to see this continue. The B in BC stands for before. Before Christ. There weren't any followers of his to be called Christians. Things that happened before somebody lived can't be named for that person. Before is different from after. Time only moves in one direction. One time, for a linguistic exercise we counted the letters in the preamble to the Constitution. Like, there are 20 A's, 10 B's, etc. Horrible. Horrible. Edit. Nope. No programming. 7th grade social studies. I had this exact assignment, except for mine I had to write a program and see that would do it for me. There's always my math professor who would say it's not my job to teach you, it's your job to teach yourselves. He'd constantly complain about the textbook he had us buy, that he chose to use. It was absolutely a terrible textbook, but it was far better than his lectures, which consisted of him going on about bug procreation, the Golden Gate Bridge, and starfish migration patterns in the Atlantic. He'd get angry whenever anyone asked him a question, and I don't think throughout the entire math class he went through a single full problem. Had a college prof whose textbook consisted of a binder filled with PowerPoints, photocopies of 2 old textbooks, and other random crap. I was doing a homework assignment one night. One question told me to refer to a chart on page X of the book. The book ends 20 pages before page X. It also references page Y, which turned out to be a PowerPoint that had nothing to do with the assignment. I emailed that prof that night. This was a Thursday, assignment was due Monday, asking where the chart was and explaining that the directions were wrong. An hour before class on Monday, no response. So I do the best I can from my notes and turn it in. 3 hours after the class is over, I get a reply email from professor. He calls me an idiot, saying I should have known it anyway, and also saying that he knew the assignment referenced pages X and Y. Ended up getting those questions wrong, along with a good majority of the class. I had a lot of teachers in high school who would use these scrapbook style textbooks. I hated it. They always referenced something that didn't make it into the final cut, often had conflicting information on different sources, wonky formatting, some shrunk text to make it fit on the page that could never be read. I had an AP chemistry teacher who was teaching that level of course for the first time. He was horrible. He had the other AP chemistry teacher even come in and teach us a few lessons he couldn't explain properly. He would take off points on my exams because I did the mathematics in a different way than him. So he said he couldn't be sure I wasn't cheating, since all my answers were correct, because he didn't understand my work. I eventually just started mailing it in for the rest of the year. When I had gotten accepted and enrolled in undergraduate, he one day said to me, "You are going to fail out of college after your first semester." April of my senior year of college, I sent him a copy of the letter I had received from a law school that offered me a full scholarship. And he said to himself, good thing I was brutally honest with him. It must have motivated him to succeed. And then he patted himself on the back and had a good day. I had a math professor straight out of somewhere over the oceans in Russia's general area, taught in US. Nobody could understand a word she said, so on the first day the whole class laughed hysterically. Homework was optional. You could use your calculators on your phones during tests, got mad at you for asking questions, and the best part is that she had to pass the majority of the class in order for her to keep her job. I crap you not. I got answers wrong on tests, but she marked them right because I did a portion of the work correctly. So I don't know if this is the worst teacher or the best teacher. Perception is key. How I miss EIU. TLDR. Teacher that hated me tried to play football with us at recess. I made him look like a fool on the football field and took an excessive celebration push to the ground from him that I hung over his head all year. Mr. N from elementary school. I was a hyper kid, I'll give him that, but he was a dong. He was about 28 and a brand new teacher. He was super nice to all the girls and but to the guys. I was his most hated kid by far though. Grade 7. He made me put my desk in the cloakroom. I was only allowed to move my desk when he wrote stuff on the blackboard, and he'd give me detention for just about anything and everything. That man cost me watching more G.I. Joe cartoons than anyone else in my life. And G.I. Joe used to be good back then. One day at recess he decided to play touch football with us. I caught a pass in the open field and only had one man between myself and end zone. Mr. N. There was no way in the world he was going to let me beat him and thought I was an easy tag. Well, I put the move of a grade 7's life on him and actually caused him to stumble. I took off running down the sideline, but he caught up to me again pretty quick. So I hit the brakes and he flew right by, but was again between me and the goal line. I went inside outside on him right on the line and took it to the house. Touchdown. In your face, Mr. N. I was dancing around and my team went crazy. They all ran down while I was doing the icky shuffle or something in front of Mr. N, taunting him as he was trying to walk back to his team. He was soupy and I wasn't dropping it, so he shoved me to the ground and said, "Frick off." My entire team just stopped running and stood there, open-jawed. Awesome 10 witnesses. I held that over his head all year. I got to move my desk out of the cloakroom even. Nothing like a little physical abuse and swearing at a 12-year-old to even the odds and put them back into my favor. I didn't get detention again either. Edit for getting grades and ages mixed. This guy put the TLDR at the beginning of his comment. Give the man an upvote, damn it. In elementary school, before religion was removed from the curriculum, I had a teacher who repeatedly gave me detention every time I asked a stupid biblical question during religion class. My parents are atheist Chinese immigrants. I had no idea who Moses was, how it was possible for him to part the Red Sea, or how Jesus was able to turn water and wine and resurrect himself. She looked at me as if I were the Antichrist. Eventually religion was removed from the curriculum and ethics made much more sense to my 10-year-old mind. I had a history professor my first year of college who could come to class late every day and show us movies every class. I learned absolutely nothing, and when he did actually lecture, he made no attempt to hide his political biases. For the grand finale, our final for the class was a 15-page paper due to him by email. About 2 weeks before grades were due to the university, I didn't do the paper. Purposefully, I sent him a blank Word document. This professor emails me literally 2 hours before grades were due those 2 weeks after I submitted it, telling me he's having trouble reading the paper. Clearly this guy didn't even plan on spending time reading or grading our work, so I didn't respond. Got a B in the class, with that final paper being one of 2 assignments we'd had during the entire semester. TL. DR. Didn't do the final. Got a B anyway. I had a teacher who occasionally got mad and threw shoes at us. I had a theater teacher who routinely threw desks. I had a biology teacher in high school who was bat crap crazy. She was sex obsessed and talked about it constantly. Mind you, this was a private Christian school, so most of the girls in this freshman class were pretty scarred. One example of her bat crap craziness was the day we were dissecting a frog. My partner was out sick like she always was on the days of dissections, so my teacher decided to be my partner. We began cutting open the frog, but she was too caught up on finding its genitals to move on. Everyone in class was taking pictures, jotting down their notes, making sketches, while I was stuck watching this teacher obsessively try to find the frog's private hole. Well, she found what she was looking for and stuck the end of the scissors in the frog, then proceeds to scissor frick the frog while I'm staring in disbelief. Everyone else was finishing up and we had hardly started. Then she says, "I've always wondered what it'd feel like to break a frog's back." She grabs the frog's head in one hand, back end in the other, with the open torso facing me across the table, and snapped the frog's back. A stream of dead frog juice squirts directly into my eye. She just says, "Oh, you should probably go clean that out in the bathroom." By the time I was done flushing my eye, everyone had already gone to lunch. Mrs. Bat Crap Crazy made me finish the dissection by myself because she was eating her lunch at her desk. I barely made the end of lunch and was too pee and grossed out to eat. Talked to the principal about her. Found out there had already been dozens of complaints against her. She didn't work there again the following year. Oh, one time, she came to school with one order too few for the dissection because she left them out on the table last night and the cat got to one. She was also a hoarder and apparently lost most of our homework and her school computer in her living room. Thinking about her makes my skin crawl. I had a teacher who yelled at us for humming during a test. It was in fact she who was humming. My history teacher was an idiot, and I mean, an idiot. She took 10 points off a 5-point question. Why are there so many salt plains in West Africa? Because, in her words, a very smart student like you should be more specific. It's Northwest Africa, not just West Africa. What the frick? Edit. I didn't read before posting. My apologies for the rampant typos. Despised my 12th grade English teacher because she was one of the worst speakers of English I'd ever encountered. She would routinely read aloud to the class. These are high school seniors, and Ms. Collins would read aloud to them at least twice a week for the entire class. We all bristled, but I was probably most annoyed at having to sit through it. So, she's reading a book about some village in Africa. A children's book really. Folks in the little village didn't have enough to eat. Ms. Collins didn't slow down one bit after pronouncing the word underfed underfed. 2 syllables, meaning these people did not have the required amount of derf. My hand was up pretty fast. Ms. Collins, maybe we should do something for these people. Maybe we should take up a collection of derf. At least there was no reading aloud in the principal's office. I had a geography teacher who was Hawaiian. I live in Hawaii, and we learned nothing about geography, only Hawaiian culture. Before we could enter the class we would have to do a Hawaiian chant. This was every day we had this class. When it was my turn to chant I pronounced all the words correctly, but she said I had a mainland accent. I'm originally from California, so I couldn't do the chant right. She made me read the chant 7 times and I was the only one who couldn't do it. Everyone laughed at me and I cried at the door. That was the only class I ever got a F in. In college my friend took Chinese to get an easy A since she grew up in Taiwan and spoke fluent Chinese in 2 different dialects. Teacher was from mainland China near Beijing. They have a very different accent. The teacher gave her a D because she didn't speak with a Beijing accent. Not a terrible teacher, but our class conditioned our math teacher, differential equations, to teach on the left side of the room. When he would walk to use the right side of the whiteboard, the entire class would look uninterested and bored. Eventually we trained him to use only one side. He finally caught on at the end of the semester when he walked to the right side of the board to get a marker and saw everyone change their posture. Though most of the teachers I have had in my past have been great, there was Ms. F, my high school chemistry teacher. The first day of high school chemistry the teacher usually explains the curriculum and standards of their classroom, etc. The teacher started off her class with this sentence: "I am not a teacher, I am a facilitator." From that point on I knew it was going to be a rough year. She never helped students after class or during lunch with anything. She was a sour divorced woman who hated all men because of this. Halfway through the year a female student who was usually in trouble took it upon herself to take the foil wrapper from a stick of gum and shape it as if it were a plug being inserted into an outlet. The teacher hadn't noticed her fiddling with it all class, but the class did. Needless to say she inserted it into the outlet and it made a loud pop and lights flickered. The teacher saw it in the outlet because all of the kids were staring right at it, and because I sat next to this chick she came up to my desk, assumed it was me, took my books off my desk, threw tea across the room, and demanded me to go to the house principal. Anytime I tried to explain my side of the story she'd just talk over me and ignore me. I left and had explained the scenario to the principal and she asked the class what truly happened. I was in the clear. From that point on I couldn't even sneeze in her class without her giving me beady eyes or yelling at me. I was happy to find out she passed away when I was in college. Frick that bee. Alright, it's about time I share my story. Last year I had an engineering professor who was just the worst teacher ever. He taught mechanics of materials and from day one I knew he was simply not good at teaching the subject. He was very monotone and really just could not explain things well at all. Well, fast forward about a month through the course when we had our first midterm. Everyone in the 300-person lecture was pretty afraid because we all had no idea what to expect. Well, the teacher comes running in all sweaty about 8 minutes after the class was supposed to begin. You could tell he just printed out all the tests. He was one of those teachers who was all paranoid about students cheating, so he printed out 3 different versions of the test. The teacher then proceeded to pass out the test. He didn't just pass them all out by giving each row a stack of tests, but instead went to each student personally, gave one a test, then went to the next student, stumbled around his papers and gave the next student a different test. I crap you not. He did this for every person in the 300-person lecture. Well, I was sitting in the back of the class, so I didn't get my test until around 15 minutes after the first person in the class. After getting the test I realize it's fucking impossible. Every question was just ridiculously difficult and everything was shittily hand-drawn, which made things even more difficult. By this point I am just looking around at everyone else in the class and people look pee off. I also noticed people are constantly going up to him and asking questions about the test. About 15 minutes after everyone has been working on the test, he makes his first announcement. Okay everyone, so the dimensions on the first question is incorrect. It's supposed to be blah and not blah. At this point everyone is just like, okay frick this, but we still keep working cause there is nothing else we could do. 10 minutes later he makes another announcement about how there was something incorrectly written on the test. I'm just so pee at this point I didn't even care about how I was going to do on the test cause I knew everyone else would probably fail with me. People also just keep flooding him with questions and now the teacher just looks like he is about to shoot himself in front of the entire class. Then, 45 minutes into taking the test he makes his final announcement, "Yeah, so this test isn't really working how I planned, so I am cancelling it, and we will have a retake next week." And that was the start of a great semester not learning mechanics of materials. TLDR. Had professor who couldn't do anything right. Here's my experience with two separate professors at the university I'm currently attending. One of them, an art history prof from freshman year, was easily the most obese person I've ever seen. Ever. That's not the bad part. Obviously he can choose to live his life however he wants, but it made him slow and inactive. The entire class would be spent in the dark, with him not moving from his seat, going through slides of art. He would get really upset with us when we didn't know the answer to his poorly worded questions, but the worst of it was that, because he was so heavy, he would get winded from talking. Every few words was broken up by this drawn out hissing inhale, and this pieces, hiss, from the Renaissance era. Hiss, and it would take him forever to get through a sentence. Needless to say, I slept through most of the class. Happy ending. All our tests were take home. Another teacher, who taught motion graphics, had us do SAR animations. I did mine pro drug use and took the opportunity to make it about the show Breaking Bad. It was all about how people should smoke M to save Walter White. Yada yada. After I was done, he asked me if I'd ever smoked M. I told him no, and he said good, don't. It feels like taking a brick to the face. Like smoking a permanent marker. Huh, you don't say. The worst teacher I ever had was when I was in grade 2. She whacked my knuckles with a ruler because I was left-handed. She insisted I absolutely could not write left-handed. If I handed in anything that was written anything left-handed I would get a 0. The very first parent-teacher meeting we had that year, my teacher took my parents and very seriously told them that I needed to be sent all the way back to kindergarten to have my entire educational process started over from scratch because the teachers before her made the mistake of allowing me to learn left-handed. My parents just waited for her to stop talking. Then they said, "You're freaking crazy person. This is balls. He's left-handed. He is going to stay that way. And you have a problem with it, we're pulling him out of the school." The teacher pleaded with my parents saying they were making a terrible mistake. If I grew up left-handed I was going to grow up to be a screwed up psycho. My parents stood their ground, kicked that crazy bee to the curb and transferred me not to another school but to another class. Now I'm glad to say I'm a proud serial killer with a deep freezer full of human parts, and I'm earning my doctorate in the Church of Satan. No wait, I'm an administrator in a hospital and teach a class at a local college in computer language skills. Left-handed. Which do you think is true? Kinda long, but here we go. I had this philosophy professor who came to clear 40 minutes late to a 1-hour 15-minute class. The only reason I stayed because I had a math class immediately after and had nothing better to do. Anyway, he shows up and is apologizing to the 4 of us who actually stayed. Next class I walk in and he is playing the guitar for roughly 10 minutes after class should have started. He then sets the guitar down and goes on this long rant on how he cannot believe everyone had left when he was only 15 minutes late, and how come after 5 minutes no one came to his office to remind him we had class. After 5 minutes of ranting, some girl raises her hand and says, "So you want us to tell you how to do your job? If I showed up 40 minutes late to work I'd be fired." He then responds, "You're a moron and have a crappy job." This roughly goes on for 20 minutes and then another student raises his hand and says, "Can we just get to the lecture?" He promptly responds, "You're an idiot. Do you not realize this is my class and this is part of the lecture?" By the time he finished his rant there was 10 minutes left in class and let us all go. The even odder thing was the next lecture he acted like nothing happened. I won't go into details, but my 10th grade English teacher ensured I would fail her class. Once I put 2 and 2 together I went up to her and said, "You may fail me, but I'll just take summer school, get an easy A and move on with you being nothing but a minor inconvenience in my life." First time in my life a teacher kicked me out of class. Life proceeded as I predicted and 4 years later my best friend's little sister amusingly left a note on the last day of class which read, "My name says frick you," written in glittery pink with hearts and smiley faces. I didn't expect her to actually do it when I made this suggestion. My 4th grade elementary school teacher was by far the worst to me. I don't know what I did to this woman to make her hate me, but she ruined a perfectly good vacation. My parents were planning on taking my sister and I to Hawaii for 2 weeks. So, of course, I go to her and get the materials that we would cover while I was gone, and she gives me some papers and problems reading in the textbook. Just normal elementary school vacation procedure. My parents had a work now party later mentality, so they made me get to work on my homework almost as soon as we touched down so I could get it out of the way. Turns out, she gave me a lot of work to do. Even my parents were like WTF, but they're not the type to complain to the teacher and rather just make me do the work. I had to set aside like 4 hours every day to do my homework, which is a lot of time for a 4th grader in Hawaii. I was even still working on it on the plane ride home. Then when I go back into class, I had a huge sense of pride because I had done all of the work this demon teacher had given me. I had beaten her. However, she pulled some crap I won't forget. Turns out, she gave me too much work, so I ended up being ahead of the rest of the class. Rather than just let me sit there and refresh myself with her lessons, she assigned me more work, which was basically just more difficult questions because I already knew the basics. God, I hated her so much. Ended up getting an A in her class, so she can suck it. What happened during a job interview that made you not want the job? English teacher looking for a position. Second interview went well. Interviewers said they wanted me to be on their team and that they would set up an appointment to sign the contract by the following Monday. I called to check in on Wednesday and was told that I would receive a call by Friday. Called on Friday afternoon and was told that the person responsible would be calling me back that afternoon. The following morning, received a phone call from the principal checking in on whether or not HR had been in touch. He promised to light a fire under them. I started interviewing elsewhere as backup. After 3 weeks of this kind of back and forth, I let them know I had accepted a different position, one which had passed me a contract to sign 10 minutes after the interview. I have had the same experience as well. Their recruiter had told the HR department I was a good catch, and I even got an interview at their main headquarters. Afterwards it was the same story as you. I gave up on them when I had an interview at 8:30, but they didn't call me in until 9:30. I had something similar happen when I was still in college. Went in for a retail position. My interview was at noon. When I showed up 15 minutes early, I was told that the manager was on lunch and wouldn't be back for another hour. I needed the job, so I waited only to have a half-assed interview and be told that they had already hired someone days before. Shady dude was the only person there in literally an empty storefront. Job was for computer repair. We actually sort of hit it off. Got into a long discussion about music production and he actually burned me a couple of CDs of pirated software for my studio. Then he explained that the job was really crappy and I should find something else. Found out later that the whole business was a scam and he embezzled a bunch of money and ran off without paying his employees. Dude must have genuinely liked me so he didn't hire me. Whoa, seems like a pretty good goo. Oh. Did an on-the-job interview with a security locksmith company. Interviewer got a phone call from his boss and they got into a huge argument and he quit right in the middle of the job interview. I just kinda went home and pretended it never happened. Was interviewing for a management position. They said that I first had to work an amount of time as a rep on a rather low pay. Yeah, don't advertise a management position if it's basically a ploy to get cheap reps. When the interviewer double booked and insisted she interview us together, then proceeded to compare our answers in real time, in front of the other candidate. When she called me 3 weeks later, outside of work hours, to offer me the job, she seemed genuinely surprised at my refusal. Interviewing for a position as an advisor for a financial firm. The manager then gave me the floor for questions. Me, is this a new role or am I replacing someone? Interviewer, well, we had 3 advisors in this department and I laid off 2 of them because I felt we were overstaffed. You would be the replacement. Me, thinking in my head, okay, I think we're done here. I'm pretty sure you can only lay people off if you eliminate their position. Otherwise it's firing. When we got to salary negotiations, and they literally wanted to give me half of what I was expecting. When I was in high school, one of the jobs I interviewed for said I noticed you put minimum wage as your desired salary. However, I got a special permission from the state to pay my high school workers less than minimum wage. I was like, WTF. My interviewer turned out to be a former co-worker from a previous job. Great dude, we always got along. 10 minutes into the interview he leans forward and quietly says, "The job's yours if you want it, but you don't want it." Trust me, I did trust him. I thanked him and left. I discovered I was being pitched a job as a life insurance salesman for the purpose of taking old people's money. I felt gross just being there. I suppose, if you put it that way, we are getting our initial site data by violating several US anti-hacking laws. I walked into the interview with no real idea what the job actually was. I walked out of the interview with no real idea what the job actually was. To this day, I still don't know what that job was. Transponster. Walked into a rapid fire panel interview. Took about a half hour of me half-farsing my way through questions I didn't know the answer to for the panel to ask me what position I was there for. I was interviewing for a position as a mechanical engineering intern, sophomore in college. They thought I was there to interview for an intermediate electrical engineer position. They apparently hadn't even looked at my resume. Then I was given a tour by a younger employee that informed to me that there are daily 6 AM and 6 PM meetings that you have to be present for or call into if you are taking a vacation day. Oh, and you only get paid for 8 hours a day. They were also the lowest hourly offer of any of the internships I applied for. I told them no. What the heck could be so pressing that management feels the need to hold mandatory meetings twice a day, and at the worst possible times too? WTF. Them. How much overtime are you willing to work? Me. As much as you're willing to pay me for. Them. Well, we don't pay for overtime. Me. You are legally obligated to compensate me for overtime. Them. Well, it won't be much, but are you willing to put in extra hours? What kind of compensation would you be looking for? Me. Cash. And for you to have this system worked out already, I'm out. Engineer 09 grad, applied to work as an engineer for a coal mine. They took us for an underground tour, essentially making sure nobody freaked out. One of the guys who had been there a long time was leading us, with a bad limp I might add, and said it's not if you will be hurt, but when and how bad. This wasn't very long after a safety meeting talking about a guy crushed himself operating heavy equipment at another site a few days before. Coal mining is a dangerous job, heck, mining in general. I've had 2 instances where an interviewer talked me right out of wanting the job. 1. I always get a few questions in myself, and I always ask the person who would be my boss, "What do you like about your job?" One time, my future boss said I don't really like my job and went on to explain why he didn't like being a manager in the company. That was the end of me wanting to be his employee. 2. I interviewed for a sales support position to sell a software product to state governments. During the interview, they admitted that they had no current contract with any state to sell the software, nor any concrete plans to get a contract. I never returned any calls for a second interview. I'm in college, so I was looking for a job while I was home for this summer, and I applied at Target. They called me and asked a few questions. One of them was when I was going back to school. I told them the last week of August, and they said they couldn't hire me because I couldn't work through the first week of September, which is really busy for them. I was somewhat upset, but it wasn't that big of a deal for me. I moved on and applied to a few other places. A few weeks later they called me and said they looked at my application again and they changed their mind and invited me in for an interview. I was excited and I was glad that I had a second chance. I go in and everything in the interview was going well. They finally asked when I was going back to school, which was weird to me because they already asked me that before. I told them the first week of August. Then the interviewer said that they couldn't hire me because I wouldn't be there for the first week of September. I asked why they even called me in and I explained what happened. The interviewer said that she had no idea that they called me before. I was very upset that they wasted my time like that. I've had multiple places blatantly lie about their compensation and benefits up until the actual interview. Last time I was job searching, I think I walked out on 3 places. Went in for what seemed to be a legit sales job. Quickly realized it was a pyramid scheme. I'm idiot. They told me that I couldn't use the bathroom whenever I wanted and most people end up with incontinence. And most people end up with incontinence. What in the absolute frick? I'm an accountant. I walked into this company for a job interview and knew something was off. It was on the 40th floor in downtown San Francisco. Had like 6 offices. Had 2 corner offices. Had a section of the office had 10 cubicles. Had a boardroom that can seat 14. Unfortunately had no employees. Just like 4. The president was an expert in his field at one time. Now he's old and should have been in a nursing home. He had 3 secretaries. These people were supposed to be servicing over 300 clients' money. How? Something was fishy as frick. Turned out later I learned from someone that he was stealing money to finance his lifestyle, which at one point was extravagant, but he was at the tail end of his scam. He was borrowing money to keep it up. He was being investigated by the IRS. Someone blew the whistle, but IRS never followed up until someone reported him because he was essentially running a money management firm without a license. Then it all came down. By then, he was so old he couldn't stand trial. His secretaries pleaded we didn't know and been bleeding him dry by making him sign random stuff. He died one day. It was sad. He got away with everything. Stealing from people who most likely were stealing money from someone. May it be shady sources of money to ripping off the taxpayer. I did dodge a bullet. Thief sets up scheme to steal money. Has stolen money subsequently stolen by pretty young women. Seems legit. They made a big reassurement that what they did in the business wasn't illegal. My interviewer today said, this isn't a pyramid scheme. If you have to say it isn't a pyramid scheme, then it's a pyramid scheme. After college, I was desperate for a job and threw my resume everywhere. I got a call for a company and I thought it was a graphic design position. I majored in history but had a knack for graphic design, so I was amazed I got a call. Well, I got there and was immediately told it was a Christian telemarketing company and I'd be a telemarketer making commission. I said the position was clearly for graphic design and the woman told me it was to draw potentially talented candidates in. They showed me a list of all the charities they telemarket for and I recognized none of them. They weren't religious either. They wouldn't let me take home anything that said charity names on them. But I memorized a few and couldn't find anything about these charities when I looked them up at home. I tried to be as polite as possible through the 2-hour ordeal, which had me shadowing a telemarketer who told me that elderly people were the best to get money out of. I have absolutely no idea why they kept pitching they were a Christian company when what they were doing was so unbiblical, but I digress. It's been 5 years since I interviewed there. I happened to go by the building a few months ago and it's now a medical center. I wonder what happened. Hopefully someone caught onto their shady shenanigans and reported them. I prepared for an interview a few weeks ago, worked on what to say for a couple of days and as usual got pretty worked up and nervous beforehand. I go to the interview where the guy sits me down and tells me this is nothing more than just a quick informal chat, and here's me in a full suit sweating my butt off having prepared 100 questions answers in my head. He then proceeds to say that I'm not suitable for the job I have applied for. He thinks I'm overqualified, but he is thinking about creating a different position in the company I can fill. I ask what the position is. He rambles for a good 20 minutes straight, no joke, about me filling a new job, but the job doesn't yet have a training scheme or any kind of official description documentation. He wants me, as part of the job, to create the job's training scheme for the job I'm literally learning to do. I'm sat there confused as heck. He hasn't got any notes with him and is just improvising this entire job description where I, as a fresh graduate, am in charge of 38 people's IT systems on my own with no proper experience. I ask what the pay and hours are. Oh, I haven't even thought about that yet. So I went for an interview that wasn't even a proper interview or related to the job I'd applied for. Such a waste of time. Taking that job is a good way to end up nearly 4 years into your career with no focused experience in any one area and unable to demand higher pay, while also being unable to jump to another company for higher pay either as you have 2 years of experience. Applied for a job in Clearwater, FL. In-person interview was normal enough, got passed through to a secondary interview. At the start of the secondary was asked to take some tests. I think no big deal. Been there done that with other jobs. They hand me a freaking book-sized stack of papers with hundreds of questions. I look down at the bottom of the sheet and in small print it stated that this test was created based on the concepts of L. Ron Hubbard and printed by the Church of Scientology. I stood up, put the stack back on the lady's desk and noped the frick right out of there. Clearwater, FL. Came in expecting Scientology, left unsurprised. You've had a lot of jobs. Yes, they were temp jobs. But why so many? They were with the same agency. But why do you leave them after a short time? Because they were temporary assignments? I don't understand. How do I know you won't leave here? Because I won't be working here. Goodbye. Thick as ST. I always listed my time with an agency as one job, and individual as assignments as job responsibilities. I had a phone interview with a company that bragged about having an on-site doctor. To me that meant one of two things. 1. It was so stressful to work there they had a doctor on site for liability. 2. If I needed a sick day I would be expected to see that doctor instead of my own. I ended the interview right there. Edit. I'm glad that my fear isn't always the case. For me the overall vibe of the call plus that mention were enough to make me cautious. Checking reviews of people that have worked from them really makes me feel like I made the right choice. My company has an on-site nurse. It is an office building. Her main job is handing out ibuprofen. Oh, we won't be paying you during your probation, which is about 3 months. And this was an entry-level job. 2 months and 27 days later they decide it's not a good fit. Being headhunted from my then current job as a manager in a small but busy and successful cafe to work for this large, posh hotel. They phoned me and said that they had found my stored CV online, which I hadn't removed since finding employment, and that one of their board members had been impressed with me as a customer in the cafe. They offered me an interview and a job with potential to move up etc, and that I'd be starting as the restaurant manager on great pay, benefits etc. It sounded great, and being quite pleased that I had just been headhunted for the first time, I went along to the interview, which was within the restaurant I'd potentially be working. I turn up in my best suit and this guy comes to interview me wearing jeans and a polo shirt. Very shortly into the suspiciously informal interview, the guy says to me, "Look, the job is yours. I can get you a uniform and you can start whenever suits." At this point I'm like, "What do you mean uniform?" And he points out the waiters and waitresses walking about in pinstripe shirts with huge long aprons. I asked what he meant. I was asked to come here because of my managerial experience etc. Guy replies, "Yes, potentially in the near future, but you'd have to start out on the floor first." I thanked him and went home. Told my boss about it and he gave me a raise. When I left that job around a year later, he put an extra £250 cash in with my wages and threw a leaving party in the cafe for me. Told me to invite all my friends and family, and it was a free bar all day and night. Best boss ever. So glad to have worked for him. I applied for the job because someone told me the manager was awesome. During the interview she mentioned that moving to the south was hard on her husband's health, humid air and bad lungs, and that they really missed home. I had a feeling I'd be getting a new boss as soon as I started, and that's almost always a bad thing. I was right. She left 3 months later, and I heard the new boss was heinous. The guy interviewing me kept calling me Frank and he wouldn't stop. If you didn't say, "Well, to be frank, I don't want this job anymore," before you left, frankly, you missed out. I can answer this one. Worked as an announcer at a college radio station for 2 years and then took a year abroad. The radio station had a great reputation on campus because it was one of the harder jobs to land, but because they received so many applications they didn't have much motivation to treat their staff well or pay them well at all, and the quality manager was a complete and absolute B to the student announcers. Never recognized quality work and always hypercritical of them every time they went on air. The only reason they took the abuse was because they didn't know any better. Definitely overworked and underpaid. Some of the girl employees would cry regularly. Well, I got back from my year abroad and I had an email waiting for me saying they would love to have me back and if I wanted the job to come by and say so. I thought I'll give them a second chance. Showed up and the quality manager greeted me with open arms and was beyond nice to me, asking how my year abroad was, etc. Well, as I answered her, she literally started correcting my word choice. asked me to project better, etc. Then she said I sounded like I had forgotten all my training and would have to go through it again and get paid a base pay rather than the pay I had when I left. This was all because I hadn't gone into radio etiquette during a casual conversation. I smiled and said sure and asked if Scott, the general manager, was around. She pages his office as we continue talking, and when he gets there I shake his hand and talk casually with him for a while so he knows I'm not just in a bad mood, and then I plainly said with her standing right there, "And while I would love to come back to this job and work for you again, I would rather die than work under this soul-sucking employee you've put as quality manager. The reason you have a problem retaining trained employees is her and her alone. If there is anything you want to do to help this station, it would be to replace her immediately." Then I bid him a wonderful day, shook his hand, and left. I got a call the next day from the quality manager apologizing if she was too harsh, that she understood my feelings from the day before and she offered me the job at the same pay as I had before I left. But I politely declined and said all the money in the world couldn't make it worth working under her. First time I stood up for myself in a work environment and last time I was ever disrespected. Respect. Interviewed for a faculty position at a prestigious university on the East Coast and was supposed to interview with the department chair. I had to wait outside his office because my interview was delayed by 15 minutes while he ripped apart this other professor over some billing issues. When I finally walked in, he asked who I was and then why I wanted a job in his department. I should have stood up and walked out at that point, but figured I'd be polite and finish up the afternoon. Went out that night and had a nice dinner and got drunk by myself on their tab. I ultimately got the job offer but turned it down. Was out of work. This was during a phone screen. Me. I'm sorry that salary is significantly less than what I was making previously. Her. Laughing, well, it is more than you are making now, so dodge a bullet there. Applied to a bartending position at a new club, the guy's second club. Strike 1, when he said it was an unpaid position, just whatever tips were made. Strike 2, he told me that the bartenders at his other club had done the dance from Coyote Ugly to earn the bar more money. He asked me what lengths I was willing to go to drive sales. A third strike was unnecessary. Just happened yesterday. We want someone who can be committed to this job for a year or longer. It is part-time and you will get hours as we have demand. You can eventually get full-time. We just had someone who has been here for 3 years become full-time. WTF. You want me to commit to you but you will not commit to me? I was also told they are in dire need to fill this position. I should be receiving an offer today. I was also told they are in dire need to fill this position. You should definitely respond with a statement about if they're in such a dire need to fill the position, they can give you full time. All went well until the male interviewer turned around and asked me, kinda hoping kids aren't on the cards for you. I'm sick of you girls pulling maternity crap. I believe in the biz they call those guys walking HR liabilities. In welding jobs, you do a job interview, then take a welding skills test. I was taking the test and current employees came up periodically, introduced themselves to me, talked to me a little. They all said pretty much the same thing. It's a crap show in there. I was skeptical at first, but I witnessed a father and son get into a super heated argument during my test. I packed up my tools and thanked the owner for the opportunity, and explained why I was declining the job and left. I went to an interview for a machinist position in a machine shop. I am a journeyman machinist. The guy didn't expect a lady machinist as someone else had called me to come and interview. He asked if I'd like to sell dietary supplements with his wife instead. WTF, I'm new. First job interview out of college and it was for an account manager job that clearly said it was an office job where you make some cold calls, keep customer happy, etc. Show up in a suit and tie, and as I'm sitting in the lobby another guy shows up interviewing for the job as well. The lady then decided to take us to Panera and interviews both of us at the same time. She then starts going on about the job, saying it's best to wear shorts and comfortable shoes since we will be going door to door 6 days a week, 8 AM to 8 PM, trying to get people to switch their gas and electric provider. After she said that, I kind of tuned out and stopped caring what she said. As soon as we got back to the office parking lot, she wanted us to come in and explain how after all this work we can end up being district managers making 80k and all this other bull crap. I instead said no thank you. Went to my car and drove off depressed that I fell for that scam. It was doing a corporate, behind the scenes kind of role for a shoe company. I wore their shoes. I had some in the back of my closet, and a corporate looking simple black dress and black jacket. This is important to note for later. I didn't look offensive. I looked respectable for the role I was applying to, and the outfit showed their shoes. So I get into my interview. It's with a brother and a sister who control the brand since their granddad passed it down to them. We go through the normal questions. I pull up some numbers and campaigns they've run and discuss it with them as well as a vision for their future. Then out of nowhere, the brother says, "But you're not a fashionista." He practically spits out the last word. I'm really taken aback, because I don't need to be in the role I applied for. You don't have a fashion blog. How can you understand fashion? And then he goes on a mini rant about how can I possibly understand their brand. I knew it had tanked at this point, and it wasn't an industry I normally work in, so I took a risk and decided to burn future bridges. I took one of my pumps off and waved it in there. "What is this thing?" I said dramatically. "Does it belong on my feet? I don't understand. Is its feet clothes?" His sister tried de-escalating the situation at that point, but it was done. I have never, ever done anything like that. Lots of other interviews have passed me where we both knew it wasn't the right fit, but we've always gone through the motions. I checked, and a few months later, they promoted one of their shoe designers to the role. The brand is not doing well. Graduated college with a teaching degree and a bunch of video production experience. Shot college events, cut them into presentations and posterity videos, ran the college television station, etc. Interviewed with my state teachers union association. They posted an ad in the paper looking for someone to cover their events. Drive to the Capitol, film the event, interview attendees, bring the footage back, cut it into 3 different videos, one for internal use, one for TV and one for the website. Also write articles for the website about said event. 3-5 days a week job, 7 hours a day, most weekends. Oh, and the Capitol is at least an hour and a half drive from here. This interview goes on for an hour. Finally it's question time. I asked if there would be benefits. She laughed. I asked about salary. She stifles a laugh. Then she says, "We were thinking 300. That number rolls around my head. There's no way." She said 300. 300? That's right. A week? That triggered the laugh. No, maybe 300 a month? Will you cover expenses? Driving, hotels, editing equipment, filming equipment? We figured you'd bring that stuff from home. I stood up, looked her dead in the face and said, "You have wasted an hour of my time." I walked out to the sounds of her hemming and hawing about maybe bumping it up to 350. I should have known better, but it was one of those door-to-door lawn cutting and window washing summer jobs, where there's a recruiter that kind of just hangs around universities looking for people to sign up. The job is marketed as manage a small group of workers, set your own hours, own your own section of the city, make up to $16,000 this summer, no door-to-door sales, great managerial experience, etc. etc. I was just like, frick it, let's just see where this goes. Right as soon as I started the interview, the guy gave me a pamphlet with random stats about the company and said, "Read over this for a few minutes, then we'll do a mock scenario." I read it over and go, "Okay, I've read it over." And he goes, "Okay, pretend I'm a customer who just opened their door and you need to convince me that I want your window washing service. Go." So I start panicking, fumbling the pamphlet, just reading off random stats. He then whispers, "Make the sale." And I'm just like, "So choose us to wash your windows." He goes, "Okay, looks like you've got the job." And then he gave me this giant contract. I brought it home, showed my dad, and he was like, "Yeah, this is complete balls and robbery. It says right here if you're 1 minute late to work, you owe the company $80. You need your own transport. It's definitely a door-to-door sales. No guaranteed pay, no overtime pay, no guaranteed employees. You have to buy your own supplies." This is like a really bad pyramid scheme. The guy called my house asking if I was still interested, and my dad just grabbed the phone and reamed him out, preying on college students, fake promises, no website, no portfolio of work, bull's contract, stop harassing my son lol. I was a dumbass, but yeah, when he said in the interview I had the job, I was honestly like, what? Really? I was wearing a suit, but forgot to wear dress shoes. I was wearing skate shoes, Lomfeo. This is the answer I was looking for. Almost fell for one myself. L didn't actually even get the job. Guess I was lucky, but it's awful to think of the kids that do get sucked in. That whole $80 for 1 minute late thing is beyond infuriating. When a few years ago, the interviewer asked repeatedly when exactly I was going to turn 18. Really sealed the deal when 20 minutes after I left he called again, just to confirm exactly when I would turn 18. Went in for what I thought was a low-level IT job with some on-the-job training. Turned out to be an overpriced A+ certification course that essentially gave you a 1-week paid internship at the end so they could justify calling it a job and advertise on job sites. Now I grew up in a small town in nowhere, Montana, so I was prepared for the reality. The job I was applying for was in an extremely isolated area I had never been to before. The interviewer told me straight up it would take years to be accepted into the town. He also asked about what church we would be interested in seeing on the tour. That was when reality set in about what I was stepping into. The job itself was great, but I couldn't put my family into that situation. Do you know anyone that got caught on that show, To Catch a Predator? If so, how did their lives turn out? I also knew a man that was caught, not on the show, but in a county sheriff run online raid. He was a teacher, a coach, ran extracurricular clubs, well known in the community, a scout leader, busted with condoms, lube and a digital camera. The case ended up going to federal court after the discovery of child pee on his computer. He was sentenced to 10 years, with 25 years supervised probation following his release. Still in prison. Interestingly enough, I was a member of both the scout troop and the school where he worked and never heard saw anything that indicated what was going on. In fact, the whole case came as a shock to pretty much everyone in the community. I do. He was in the military, just got home and was lured to the home of a 13-year-old girl. He showed up, took his shirt off and was confronted. He was acquitted. His parents have a fair amount of money and frankly anyone who can afford a decent lawyer will get off on this. The kid has been arrested several times since, is in and out of rehab and is pretty much a menace to society. He was still a little scummy before being on the show but his life definitely took a turn for the worse. Barry's very good. A teacher from a high school in my area got caught on that show. He was fired, had to register as a sex offender and then was forced to move out of the area. Yes, he got a shorter sentence by allowing them to use the footage for the show and when he got out he only went after 18-year-olds. He was 42. And when he got out he only went after 18-year-olds. The system works. There's a FB page for my county that sets up unofficial stings. 20-year-old got caught trying to cheat on his girl with the 14-year-old. Tried go shaggy his way out of it and got dumped. A friend I knew since junior high got busted on this show. He showed up, walked in the front door, knew something suspicious was happening, turns and leaves out the front door, only to be arrested. He was in GA for ROTC training when it happened. He was sentenced to a few years in prison in GA, then got out and moved back home. He was a LT in the Guard, was working on his PhD in chemistry, all gone now. Don't know what he does now. I had to distance myself after that. The interesting part is all the signs you don't see till afterwards. His first wife thought she caught him looking at child pee, and they had a big fight over it. She divorced him. He then started dating a girl who looked really young, who he then knocked up. Turns out the girl was only 15 when that happened. He was probably 25. Also, he was at a party less than a week after he got home from deployment to Iraq. A girl came out of the restroom, and he was laying on the couch staring at her and jerking off. She told me, and I never mentioned it. I wrote it off as the stress of rotating back to the real world after 12-16 months in a war zone. I don't know what he's up to now. Still lives in the area I think. But he had a good life started and threw it all away. I don't know anyone personally. I used to be big into Yahoo chat. Hooked up with a few girls from there. Legal age, of course. However, I believe that I was being baited once by perverted justice. I was on Yahoo Chat one evening, in my state chat room when an IM pops up from a girl with the screen name Kelly14 for fun. She asks how old I was. I was 21 at the time. I decided to chat with her, but I kind of knew it was a setup, so I kept it clean since I have no desire to send sexually explicit chats with a 14-year-old. She kept asking me about sex and what I've done with girls and if I wanted to meet up. I never answered her questions and just diverted from answering. I told her I had to go and she ended the conversation with okay whatever. Loss. LOL. I logged off, made a new screen name and went back online. Same girl IMs me and I tell her I'm 15. She tells me she's not interested and leaves. I smell a setup. Your hunch was right. Yup, guy I worked with. He was in Jerry for 2 weeks of training and decided to hook up with a teenage girl on his weekend. Didn't work out though, obviously. He died in prison before the trial though. He had some pre-existing condition and quit taking his medication, so I guess it was suicide. He left behind a wife and kids too, so I can't imagine what that guy put them through. He had some pre-existing condition and quit taking his medication, so I guess it was suicide. Or they refused to give him the medication he needs to stay alive and he died. It happens a lot more than you think. Mostly because they cover it up so they don't get called out for literally killing someone through neglect. It's most common with insulin though. I went to preschool through 8th grade with a guy who got caught by an internet police sting from a different state. Basically, he was a substitute teacher. He met some fake 13-year-old in a chat room and sent pictures of his dong and a video of himself masturbating for her. Turns out, the girl was a state trooper a few states over. So, they talked to the state from my home state, and he was arrested without incident at his home. He pleaded guilty and to some lower charge and got probation. Everyone I grew up with found out though, because it was in the news since he was a teacher. He was an odd dude growing up. He was the kid who went through puberty in 1st or 2nd grade, so he was taller than everyone, had a deep voice, and hair where there was no hair before, and he liked to show that off. He would tower over people and push them around. In gym, he would linger in the nude for a long time, just so everyone could see that he was fully developed. He was generally a really odd guy, and terribly obnoxious sometimes. He frequently smelled pretty bad. However, he never struck me as a bad person. Just someone I didn't want to be friends with. I lost track of him after high school, but I heard he got really religious at some point in university. Apparently he didn't want to hear any curse words, and would stop conversations if someone said anything he deemed vulgar. I last saw him at a mutual friend's wedding. He had gotten married to this really nice girl whom he brought to the wedding. She was awfully sweet and clearly saw something in him that I had missed. I feel bad for her, as I think she was at home when the surprise arrest occurred, and she probably had no clue what was going on in his head. I'm not sure if they are still married. Well, that's all I got. About 7 years ago, a teacher at my old high school got caught in a police sting attempting to meet up with a young boy. I didn't know him well at all, but he seemed like a friendly, if quiet, young man. His wife, however, a brilliant PhD who visibly lamented her standing as a high school teacher, remained at the school. The next year I had her for an economics class. We didn't learn anything about economics, but she did entertain us with ultra bitter, cryptic complaints about her ex-husband. She also brought their young child to class about 1/3 of the time, and once she told us the story of the first and only time she tried acid. Reading that back, it's not a very interesting story, but there were so few responses that I couldn't help posting. Yep, went to basic training with a guy. Really messed up story actually. Dude got married and had a kid. He used to always have fights with his wife though and either complain about it or apologize on Facebook all the time. All I knew at the time was that she was looking at his MySpace messages and got pee, so I imagined she caught him flirting online. Well, after what looked like a rough Facebook fight, she committed suicide a couple of days later. Really sad. What was even sadder was that he left his kid with the grandparents and went to Florida 2 weeks later to relax and get away from things. Well, lo and behold, a few days later someone posted a video of him entering a house and getting tackled by cops. Turns out he had been talking to a 14-year-old about how he wants to do some messed up stuff with her, and that's why the wife committed suicide. What's even more messed up is the dude only spent like a month or 2 in jail before he got released and even got to keep his job and kid. I think he's the scum of the earth after figuring all this out, and I guess pretty much everyone else did too, cause they all posted about it on his Facebook. Last I saw it looked like his life was getting back to normal, but at that point he tried to contact me to see how I was lately and I removed him from my friends list without replying. That is disturbing. A guy who was caught on that show worked for my mom. I think he might have gotten deported afterwards or he fled the country. He had pretty good IT experience by that point, so he would have done pretty well once he got back. The truly crazy part is that he has a very distinctive first name. My first name. For some reason, according to mom logic, that meant I was probably a pedophile. I guess her crazy logic was that since I liked underage teenage girls at that time, since I was an underage teenage boy and I had the same first name as that guy she knew who was a pedophile equals I was a pedophile. She kept trying to punish me before I finally blew up at her and told her she was freaking insane. My dad must have agreed since he didn't punish me for cussing her out. TLDR. I told my mom she was freaking insane because she used the transitive property incorrectly. The son of one of my clients was caught almost 8 years ago, and the entire thing was featured on the show. He got booked, went through the system. He has a privileged background and was able to get a very good attorney. Throughout the process he had to give up his computer internet, but after a year or so he was able to regain access. He did time served, spent less than a week in jail, and then he was on probation. His life continued on. He still works in the same field, definitely unable to be as successful as he could have potentially been, but it didn't destroy his life. I'm sure this would have been a drastically different story if his family didn't have money. I do. It was the brother of a guy I know. It was before it was an actual show, but it was the same company. This was presumably a trial run for the show, I guess. This was in AZ. He was 19ish years old in college and met a 16-year-old girl in a chat room. The fricked up part is that the communications went on for about a month, with the girl continuously contacting him and begging him to come meet her. He finally gives in and is then arrested. There was a big class action lawsuit made by the men of people that were caught this way for the method which was used to arrest them, which was entrapment. AZ apparently gave the TCA or people a slap on the wrist but kept everyone in prison. I think he ended up serving 6+ years and is registered sex offender. He got out of prison a few years ago. I've boycotted the show. I feel like it creates more predators than it actually catches. A 19-year-old banging a 16-year-old is not a pedophile. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What you wonder is, how do middle-aged men delude themselves into actually believing a 14-year-old chick wants to have sex with them? Furthermore, why do they think that sending close-up photos of their dong and saggy balls will turn her on? I have seen interviews with predators who have met 5-6 different girls on the internet and hooked up before they are caught. It does happen. So I kind of know too. First guy, there was a delivery guy that I knew that got caught in a sting on the show. He didn't show up for work one day and said it was because he got taken to jail for parking tickets. No one thought anything of it. 1-2 months later the episode airs, and he doesn't show up for work the next day. They had previously done a background check on him and was clean. His fiance's dad bailed him out of jail knowing what the charges for. Last I heard they were still getting married, and he was working for his fiance's dad. Second guy, good friend's older brother was chatting online. The person online asked to meet up, and he kept refusing. He just liked chatting. Eventually they go after him anyway and publish his identity online and all the chat logs. He loses his job, loses fiancé, has to get registered as a sex offender and move back with his parents. He couldn't get work for a while, so he lived off of online poker, actually quite decently. Ended up getting a better lawyer, and is getting his record cleaned. He still has to go to see a therapist as part of his probation. The person online asked to meet up, and he kept refusing. He just liked chatting. Eventually they go after him anyway and publish his identity online and all the chat logs. That crap should be illegal. I remember when this show was getting started and perverted justice was making headlines. A few times I had been on chat sites chatting with girls, mostly just chatting just to chat, but I'd be lying if I said that it didn't bother me if the chat turned sexual. I wasn't into sexual role playing, wouldn't get hardcore filthy, and certainly wouldn't exchange pictures or other personal details, like so many people who get busted seem to do, and I would never push a sexual discussion if they weren't interested in it as well. But at the same time I wouldn't not talk about it if it came up. But one time I remember how quickly she started to hint about sex, and the conversation quickly went into talking about it. We talked about what we liked in boys, girls, what some things felt like, erections, periods, what we've done with others, stuff like that. Then she started dropping hints about if I could come over to her house when her parents were away. When that happened, it seemed really pretty obvious, pretty quickly, that the person on the other end was almost certainly bullshitting. I've never had any desire to pursue anything more than a chat and fantasy, and wouldn't ever follow up on something like that in real life. So I just kind of talked to them a few more minutes and then politely exited the conversation. She said she lived in a state next to mine, but it wasn't in a state where one of the Catch a Predator shows were filmed. But nonetheless, in hindsight and the way she talked, I am pretty sure it was a sting operation. That was about 10 ago and it kind of freaked me out. Text chat rooms are pretty much dead now, so I like to stay on the much more legal side of adult entertainment. I used to work in a gift shop at a museum. One day this man comes and pays with a credit card. My co-worker recognized his name from one of these shows and looked him up. Perfect match. He was totally normal, no weird vibes from him. Maybe because I wasn't a 13-year-old girl, but kind of unfortunate that a random cashier could recognize him, months if not years after the incident. My friend of mine didn't end up on To Catch a Predator, but he has a similar story. When he was in his low 20s, he was talking to a girl online that was actually law enforcement claiming to be an underage girl. I'm not sure exactly what age. They had sexually explicit chats, but as far as I know, he never showed up at her house with beer and condoms or anything. He ended up getting probation and couldn't go near a school for like 2 years or something. He's a great guy now, though. He was kind of a jerk in high school, but he seems to have really matured as a result of this incident. Or just as a result of growing up, I don't know. You think people would stop responding to propositions from minors online after the popularity of shows like TCAP? A friend of mine was caught going to visit a 16-year-old girl, aka police officer, when he was 19. He actually did get a slap on the wrist because he never said anything to her which was sexual. The police made all of the innuendos. The worst part was that they used a real girl's identity for all of this. So when it all came down, her family sued the frick out of the police department for defamation. But to me, that was the most fricked up part. The key is, confess to Hansen that you like to roleplay with the other person pretending to be an underage girl. In fact, you're not even into girls. You're into guys who roleplay being 14 years old girls online. I didn't want to get weird in front of her when I saw this 14 years old come out. I was shocked. Didn't know how to react, so I played it cool. I thought we had an understanding. I just don't like the other person breaking character. I want them to be convincing. WTF is a real 14 years old doing online in my sex chat forum? What kind of parent lets that happen? This is an offense against me. Is there a little girl here all by herself? Tobias Funky from Arrested Development, walking into his daughter's former house, where a child molester entrapment TV show is being filmed. Man, I have seen that show and they sure as frick need to get a new room. If I were to go to a little kid's house and they had She Says She Is Baking Cookies and will be right out, I am getting the frick out. Diversify your set, damn it. Yeah, bake a lasagna or something. Lasagna is something I can get on board with. An acquaintance of mine was married to someone she later found out was freaking crazy. After a year of them being together, she found out he was cheating on her with a 15-year-old girl and they were plotting to kill her for insurance money and run away together. Almost needless to say, he's in jail now and I'm glad she's safe. It seems weird when you see it on the news, but when you've actually met the person on TV who's being arrested for whatever it's called when you premeditate a murder but don't actually succeed in killing the person, and at the time thought they were totally normal, it's pretty messed up. My time to shine. Ahem. So I was 15 and asked a guy from my church who I had a crush on to my homecoming. He was 19. My parents said no way. Me, being 15 and fairly rebellious, obviously didn't listen and met up with him at my dance. It was awkward because we didn't really know each other that well. So fast forward a couple years, I'm in college and I get an email from my best friend saying that Josh had been arrested for soliciting sex from a minor. He chatted up this 13-year-old online, drove 4 hours to her house, showed up to this little girl's house with condoms and booze, only to be greeted by police. Perverted justice got him. For the record, we did not hook up at my homecoming. I was a nerdy Catholic girl who really loved Weezer. Say it ain't so. A couple years back, I was watching through a ton of TCAO videos on YouTube. Great for a laugh. I recommend it. And there's an episode in Fortson, Georgia, with a guy named Cody Green on it. I happened to notice this guy looks, dresses, talks, and walks exactly like my older brother. Me, being the great brother that I am, showed the video to my mom, who only knows how to speak Spanish, and said, "Watch this video, tell me what you see." Her exact words translated to English were, "Why do you have a video of Raul? Whose house is he in? Who's that man? Why is he getting arrested?" And then she calls him to yell at him. Does that count? My old boss was on TCAP. He tried to have sex with a 13-year-old girl and was caught when they were in Petaluma. He was a bit of a jerk though, so I wasn't too broken up about it. I went out on a couple dates with a guy who got caught in a police sting by an undercover cop. Thing is, he was a young state patrol officer. He maintained the girl never stated her age, but they slammed him with everything they had, and he's a felon now and can only find crappy jobs. Honest question. How the heck does To Catch a Predator show the faces of those arrested? Being on that show would ruin your life, so you obviously would never sign a consent form. I thought without your consent they had to blur you. I've seen some episodes of cops with faces blurred, which I assume means all the others actually allow it. I mean, they're innocent until proven guilty, so you can't just say they're criminals and have no rights to consent. Anybody know? I've never known anyone on To Catch a Predator, but I used to know Philip Garrido before he was uncovered to be a crazy kidnapper guy. He ran a printing press with Alyssa, the girl he kidnapped and held for almost 20 years as his daughter and assistant. I had actually personally met her a few times. I can go more in depth if you guys would like. He wasn't on any show, but I know a guy that is 26 and dates a 14-year-old. Thing is that in my country nobody seems to give a crap about this sort of stuff. This kind of gap seems almost common here amongst many relationships. It's really messed up and nobody does anything about it. I'm from Romania. Not on the show but pretty creepy. We have a cottage on a lake and one of our neighbors was very nice. Took us tubing, invited us over for dinner, to watch fireworks, etc. He was very nice to me and my friend especially. One day I was reading the paper and it turns out that this guy was just arrested for raping his grandson. I was very freaked out. I still don't know what happened to him. Oh my god, this is the one AskReddit I can answer. It wasn't on To Catch a Predator but a FBI trap website for child pornography. He got off because he was in high school. He was 18 but some bull's law exploited him off. Everybody knew about it but he still got away with it. He was a fat pansexual annoyance who creeped on every single thing that looked his way. Everyone at the school hated him. Oh yay. He was also the only man on our cheerleading squad. He now goes to Rutgers somewhere, but honestly I couldn't care less about him. I was that guy. Having gone through the whole rigmarole, I can make a couple of points about how I feel I was treated. 1. The way they portray it on TV is very one-sided. The agents who set up the stings are actually rather aggressive in how they pursue older men. Granted, I fell for it, but the person who talked to me only made allusions to the fact that she was under 18. And I never really asked. All I saw was cute girl wants to hook up with me. Awesome. 2. It's pure entrapment. For the sake of entertainment. There is no real crime being committed, since arguably, it would be very unethical to have an actual underage girl talking to a guy. I got an acquittal because my lawyer was successfully able to argue entrapment, and due to the fact that the girl setting me up never explicitly disclosed her age, and the fact that no crime was actually committed. Actually, most of these cases are thrown out or argued down for exactly that reason. But by then, it doesn't matter. Everyone has already made their money off of your downfall, and at the end of the day you're just left with nothing and no way to move forward in life. 3. The whole process of publicly shaming someone is enough to ruin their lives. No conviction necessary. This is not how I was brought up to believe the justice system worked. Innocent until proven guilty my butt. 4. I feel that, at the heart of the issue, we're making spectacles out of people with legitimate mental illnesses and crucifying them. I don't believe that people choose who they are attracted to, and with as inhumanly as we treat some people, it makes me wonder who the real monsters are here. The ones who are acting on impulses they cannot control, or the ones who are inflicting cruel punishment in a cold, calculated manner for the sake of entertainment upon their fellow humans. Prob going to get buried, but I knew a guy in high school. He was a year older than I was, but I knew back then that he might be gay. After high school and 10 years later, he is really involved with the Catholic Church and says he wants to be a priest or something like that. Runs a couple of their youth programs and finally gets busted with a 13-year-old boy. He was 31 years old. I do. He was a midget, not exactly relevant, but he lived up the block from me. He was friends with my parents and he used to have barbecues frequently, which I would also attend. I was a very young girl at this time. We saw him on the show, my dad laughed, and we haven't heard from him or of him since. One of the guys was my JV baseball coach in high school. His son was a year older than me too. He was really weird and never really got along with many people. They moved to Florida my junior year. I'm from Texas, and my senior year he got caught on To Catch a Predator. He refused to actually go inside the house or do anything, and I think he was acquitted of all the charges, so the only thing on his record is the arrest. But yeah, it was crazy. All the guys at school were talking about it. The craziest thing was that he was around children all day at his job. I guess those kind of people tend to flock to that sort of thing. Shudder. The founder of Perverted Justice, Philip John Eade, the name he uses on the show is an assumed name he used, always creeped me out on the show. He seemed like those pastors that rail about homosexuals but are secretly doing lines of see off their boyfriend's buttocks. Sometimes you catch a predator. Sometimes you catch a young guy who is depressed, socially awkward and never had a girl's attention in his life. What's this? An instant message? No way, it's a girl's name. She must have made a mistake. This can't be right. Suddenly someone is interested in him. Thinks he's funny and sexy. He's nervous that she is 15, but that's only 4 years right. She wants to meet him. He is so nervous, but this is the only chance he's ever even had a glimpse at, to be close with another person. It's only 4 years difference, right? He tells himself he shouldn't, but she is so persuasive. She really wants to meet him. He is a virgin and simply having a girl talk to him in a flirtatious manner is intense. It's the most interaction he's ever had with a girl. He feels for the first time in his life a tiny glint of self-confidence appear in the void of loneliness. It shines like a beacon. She wants him to bring condoms and alcohol. He doesn't drink except for that beer he had at Christmas, but then he has never had sex, so it might help make him less awkward. There is a problem. He can't legally buy it, he's too young. She demands alcohol and condoms. She is so persuasive. His dad has a bottle of Jack Daniels in the cabinet. He'll use that. Flash forward 2 days. He is driving 2 hours away to meet her. Buying the condoms was awkward. He could feel the cashier's judgment. The look of as if you need these. His heart is racing from nerves. He's gonna screw this up. But she texts him. She can't wait to see him. She can't wait to see him. He reads it over and over. The self-confidence is a warm little glow on the inside. It's not much, but it's all he's ever had and it feels so very good. He's at her house. It's only 4 years right. This could be his future wife. When she's 30 he'll only be 34. That's a tiny gap. This is the break he's been waiting for. He knocks on the door. His palms are sweaty. A bubbly voice calls out. It's beautiful and happy and angelic. She tells him to let himself in and make himself at home. She's just doing her hair. He puts the alcohol on the counter and stands nervously. What should he say? Oh god, he's so bad at this already. He is so nervous. Brian, a man's voice calls his name. Why don't you have a seat over there? Chris walks into the room. Brian's heart sinks. Not because his life is over. He didn't really have one to begin with really. But for a brief moment a blind man had been given sight. Only to have it taken away for the entertainment of the masses. The warm little glow went out. Forever. TLDR. There are few more cruel forms of entertainment than that show. Who is the worst attention you've come across? Sister-in-law. At our wedding she did everything she could to steal attention away from her sister, my wife. She wore a dress that she had altered to be both low-cut and short-skirted. Then when no one was paying her attention kept accidentally dropping things so she would bend over to pick them up. When her dad remarried she was telling people at the ceremony that she had cancer. Bill had come to terms with it. She didn't have cancer. I went to a costume wedding once. One woman, not the bride, wore her own wedding dress and claimed she was the bride of Chucky. My fiance has been my best friend since we were kids. Once, in high school, he was dating a girl who decided that after scaring the crap out of him by trying to cuff him to the bed against his will, she was going to threaten to kill herself if he dumped her. About 10 years later I ran into her at a party. She was there with her husband and infant son. Not the kind of party you take a baby to, but okay. She proceeded to tell me how they never technically broke up since being 15 years old. His answer to "if you dump me I'll kill myself" was to just stop talking to her. And because of that, they were technically still together and she was cheating on him with her husband, making her son a bastard. She was 100% serious, and she also told me to tell him she wanted an apology. This was in front of a lot of very stunned people. Man, I feel bad for her husband. My roommate's cat died last week. When she told her co-workers, one lady proceeded to start telling a story about a cat she kinda owned that never even lived with her that died 5+ years ago. She got so worked up that she started crying and the entire office started consoling the co-worker instead of my roommate whose cat had died the day before. Unbelievable. This lady needs a serious dose of go fuck yourself Errol. My grandma has to make everything about her. Literally everything. No matter the person or situation. And if the convo switches to where it's not about her, she gets visibly annoyed and you can see the gears turning in her head as she tries to figure out how to get the conversation back onto her. She constantly retells stories she's already told 1,000 times back from when she was younger if she can't think of anything recent. If I have to ever again hear about how she was prom queen back in 1951, or valedictorian of her 10-person 8th grade class, or how whenever she goes anywhere, everyone just loves her, she literally says, and you know, they just love me all the time, I'm gonna lose it. I knew a girl in college whose father died at least 6 times over the span of one semester. Like, we would be hanging out, and then she gets a call, and then she drops the phone, her eyes go red, and the waterworks start. There's a girl in my college classes who claims her dad owns a huge soccer team but doesn't know the name. She's dating one of the LA Lakers but can't give his name out. But she is also talking to someone who's in the NFL to keep her options open. She says her dad works at a local steel factory and has no idea where his extra money comes from because he gives her hush money, then called another girl out in class for lying to fit in. There was a girl who used to be part of this group of friends that I saw on the odd occasion when I was a teen. I only met her twice, but on both occasions she started to full on sing super loud whenever everybody else was talking and she was not involved in the conversation. I knew a woman who was similar. She was actually a pretty good singer. Problem was, it went to her head and she sang in everybody's face after announcing what a good singer she was. Annoying. There was this British TV show about bad moms and one of them made her daughter dress way older than she looked. Daughter wanted to wear a t-shirt and jeans to go out to eat. Mom made her wear tights, mini skirt, boots, tight tee, sleeveless overcoat, and a boatload of jewelry. Kid basically looked like she was in a Disney show and would make her daughter randomly sing and do her cheer routine in public because you never know who's watching. People get discovered on the streets every day. The little blonde girl, I felt so bad. Back in early elementary school during art, I used to talk crap about my own art to get a lot of compliments from other students. My teacher noticed it and told me to stop. I once did that and my friend was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. It sucks," and I felt so betrayed. There was a girl in my college that constantly would say crap. During orientation she told people she was recovering from brain cancer, didn't happen, and was partially deaf. She wasn't. She then found out my friend had epilepsy, so she started doing these exaggerated tremors. She then would fake seizures all the time for all the years she was there, which was a pain in the butt because I would have to treat them like real ones. She did it once during a power outage for the most attention possible. She did it so often that once 911 hung up on someone calling it in because they knew it was her. Since I keep getting comments about 911 hanging up, I feel like I should mention that the person who called was also a dispatcher. Sounds like a pathological liar. Girl in college would constantly try to get attention. "Oh, my boyfriend dumped me. My new guy beats me. I am gay. I am not gay. I own a signed Kurt Cobain bass guitar, but by far the worst one. I was violated and the guy got sent to prison. Gave people a paper cutout of a debauchery case, but it looked odd. So I tracked it down using the Google and found she had altered it and it was some other girl. We all cut ties with her after that. Freaking psycho. Kurt Cobain bass guitar." My high school ex posted a picture of a knife to his wrist on Twitter after I broke up with him for cheating on me and being pathological liar. He told everyone to message me and to talk to him. I cut off all contact, or he was going to kill himself. I hate that I was young and dumb, so it worked and we ended up back together. I once had a guy do that, but we'd been on like 3 dates. Called the cops on his pathetic butt. He got all upset with me because his parents got angry with him, lol. But I totally understand the young and dumb part, especially if you once cared about this dude and you don't want to see him in pain. A lady that I work with is the biggest one-upper I have ever met. In April I had major surgery to remove half of my digestive system and was given a lot of attention from our concerned co-workers. She was not happy because she wasn't the center of attention anymore. Well, she found out she needed to have a DNC, outpatient procedure, to cauterize her uterus, and you're awake for the whole thing. She came into work, she decided to milk it for all she could, and when she came into work the next day she was distraught over the fact no one came to check up on her the night before and wouldn't talk about anything but her recovery. By the end of the week she was telling people she was recovering from cancer surgery. In fact, she still complains that she is recovering from it, and this happened back in April. She also told me, unsolicited of course, that the reason she didn't come see me while I was in the hospital was because her mom had died in a hospital 13 years ago and she is still grieving, and going to a hospital would make her grieving process start all over again. I actually feel bad for her. Oh, I know a bigger one-upper than that. Alright, in high school, my buddy was banging this girl who told everyone she got shot. I asked her to see the bullet wound and she pulled her shirt down a little so I could see her shoulder. You know what was freaking covering her wound? One single ace band-aid. Bonus story. So she told my buddy he got her pregnant. Condom did rip. So believable. She told him she wanted an abortion and needed $60 for it. He gave it to her, but I asked her how she was going to get it for $60. She said she was going to the hospital with a fake kid. I forgot the worst of all. She was a loud and proud juggalette. She got a shot. You know those vaccines are as bad as bullets. I went to uni with her, in no particular order. She was violated repeatedly by an ex-boyfriend who kept on breaking into her room at night. When we reported it to campus security, they never saw anyone enter her room on security cameras. Same ex carved S into her chest with a knife. Never saw any scarring or evidence of any sort. Same ex spray painted S onto the outside of her window. She lived on the 4th floor of a tower block. Whilst traveling back home for Christmas she fell over, knocked herself out, came to in the hospital, was discharged and beat the train home she missed because of being knocked out. That particular train journey takes 3 hours. Whilst at home for Christmas her dad kept on taking LSD and asking her to drive him to places in his van, even though she's never had a driving lesson, was ran over repeatedly by a mutual friend. She just walked into his car, claimed to be the biggest drug dealer on campus, but no one ever once saw her stash. Can speak 7 languages fluently, but she can never remember which languages they are. There are so many of these. It was really sad and pathetic. That last one made me laugh. Got 2 gems. 1. A high school friend. When his girlfriend talked about ending the relationship, he sent her a picture of him pointing his dad's gun at his head saying the typical "if you leave I'll kill myself," and he always pulled that sort of drama antics. 2. High school graduation party at hotel. They gave out sparkling wine without alcohol. I saw peeps chugging down glasses and then acting like they were really drunk. There was no bar or alcohol included in the party. In hindsight, they were cringy as frick. My 2 ex-friends, they dated in high school, were forced to split because she was legal age, 19, and he was 15. Got back together and just made a bunch of bad choices together. Engaged after a month, and just constantly crying for attention. Everything he cooks, microwaves, goes onto Facebook and Snapchat with annoying voiceovers of her going out of the office so good. Constant posts of "oh my god I love my baby so much" with lovey-dovey photos of them. But they fight and break up more than anyone I have ever known. If he pee her off, she text me a picture of her engagement ring being taken off. They thought a friend Snapchatting a picture outside of their house and not going to see them meant he had to be planning on killing himself. Proceeded to spam all their mutuals with panicked messages until they found out it was basically just a "hey look I was in your town" pic. Not only are they attention W but just a total hot mess altogether. A little touchy, but here goes nothing. My brother was in a toxic relationship. He was physically and mentally being abused. Not physically. He did manage to get his abusive girlfriend pregnant. It got to a point where he was actually crying because he just needed to come home with me to our mom. That was the last straw for me, so I said frick it, come with me. So he grabbed his stuff, and we literally ran from her. She was throwing his stuff out the door and screaming. We kept running. But then she yelled, "If you don't come back right now, I'm going to stick a knife in my pregnant belly." I wish I was making this up. We of course ran back to prevent this. So yeah, that. This girl in 8th grade claimed she was depressed and suicidal. She was popular so everyone believed her and felt bad for her. She got all kinds of attention for it. There was this kid in the same grade who was actually depressed and he tried hanging himself on a doorknob in the back of our class when no one was looking one day, and in an odd way he became popular after because of it. She decided to do the same one day in class, except no one noticed her doing it until she was passed out and had to go to the emergency room. Okay, I think we found the winner here. There was a chick in my high school who faked pregnancy, claimed to do drugs in the restroom with her drug buddies, and then told people I was the father. I never had fricked her because I kind of had the gay. This kid who's chilled out by now and I'm good friends with once was a huge attention W. One day he walked up to our table while we were peacefully playing Smash and pulled out one of those rolls of minty tape. That's what I call them. Meant to make your breath minty, and says, "I'm eating this whole roll and none of you are ever gonna stop me, god dang it," and so we didn't. Absolute mad lad. In my sophomore year of high school I briefly dated, then had an on-again off-again friendship with this senior in my drama class. We'll call him T.I., as in the idiot. T.I. was awesome when we first met. He told a lot of cool stories and seemed to have an interesting life. He was a little weird, but the fun kind of weird, and very socially savvy, so he was generally well liked by a lot of the class. Over time, however, I could tell T.I. was a little off. His stories started to seem a little outlandish. For example, how Katy Perry and Ariana Grande kissed him on each cheek at the same time. How he survived a 30-foot fall from a treetop into a large hole after being unconscious for hours. How he had a fake girlfriend, confirmed to be fake, that he dumped just so he could date me, and other unbelievable stuff like that. Something just wasn't right about this guy. The most attention W thing T.I. ever did was tell our entire class that he had some fatal disease that required surgery, from which he was probably going to die. We weren't dating anymore and in an on phase of our friendship at this point BTW. He even went as far as saying goodbyes and offering to sell his stuff. Honestly, I could tell that this was probably bulls. He didn't know what this disease was, except a tumor up near his, and I quote, "you know what," and just cause he was a compulsive liar in general. But those who didn't know him as well as I did fell for it. One girl even had to go to counseling because she was so worried about him. He told us this the Thursday before a week-long Thanksgiving break, and that his surgery was the next Tuesday, and if we didn't hear from him by that night, he'd be dead. So I texted him Tuesday night. No response. I texted him on Thursday wishing him a happy Thanksgiving. Nothing. At this point, I actually started to get a little worried what if something did happen to him? But there he was on Monday, back at school, totally fine, not in a wheelchair or crutches, or even limping. Yeah, I bitched him out on it pretty hard. TLDR. Psycho friend made up a fake fatal illness and worried our classmates' friends for days for the sole purpose of getting attention. This girl I knew was the literal definition of attention seeking. She would always show off and always have to mention how much money and influence she and her family had, and then in the same breath would try to convince you she was from the hood. She wasn't. She was literally from the richest area in my city where higher level politicians and famous people live. She would constantly be extremely dramatic and say really disgusting things to get a rise out of people. She'd make really outlandish comments about different races, religions, poor people, the homeless, etc. She voted for Trump simply because she wanted to get a reaction from people. She was the kind of person who needed to one-up literally everyone. If you had a chronic illness, so did she, and it was so much worse than yours. Bad upbringing? Hers was worse. A tragic loss? Nothing compared to what she went through. Had some incredible news? Sucks to suck because hers was better. Her roommate was having some serious mental health issues and she somehow managed to make it about her and her safety and vilify the poor girl instead of actively helping her seek treatment. She would get drunk and act like a crazy fool, flailing her arms and being loud and physical just so people would watch her. She'd make out with all our mutuals, who'd she refer to as her sons. Gross. Just to stir up drama. She would steal things from people's houses at a party, put it on Snapchat, and then when she was caught would delete it and act like it never happened and then play the victim. She lied to everyone about hooking up with a mutual friend of ours. She's lost a lot of friends in the past year or two, myself included, because we can't deal with her dramatics and attention-seeking ways anymore. I'm trying to be as non-descriptive as I can because a lot of the things she did are very specific, but this is just some of the stuff she's done. If I listed everything, we'd be here all day. I have the time to read more about this girl. My ex's niece, who still lived at home with her parents, pretended she was pregnant at 16. The really freaked up part was that her stomach grew for the full 9 months of her pregnancy. She told everyone that she was uncomfortable with anyone touching her stomach, and as she was happy to wear tight clothes that would accentuate her bump, she had everyone convinced the pregnancy was real. Her parents ended up spending a fortune buying a pram, cot, and clothes, etc. Eventually, when the baby didn't appear and her parents discovered the truth, they just never mentioned the pregnancy or baby ever again to anyone. I'm sure they went ape crap at her behind closed doors, but she effectively got away with it because no one else either within or out with the family ever mentioned it again to her. For whatever stupid reason, one day shortly after her supposed due date, I went round to visit her when her parents were at work. I asked her where the baby was. After initially looking at me sheepishly and ascertaining that I hadn't heard anything from my mother-in-law, her gran, she went on to tell me this elaborate story about how her waters broke on the living room couch, that her mom rushed her to hospital, and after a long labor she gave birth to her son. Can't remember what she called this figment of her imagination. Anyway, she went on to tell me that he was in hospital being monitored as he was a little small, but he was doing well and she visited him every day. I didn't, still don't, like confrontation, so I never called her out on her balls and never revisited that conversation again. And nor did she. She really ought to have been in some form of counseling, as no one in their right mind would ever do something even remotely similar to that, but she never did. She grew up and went on to have 4 real pregnancies, but has never worked a day in her life and is altogether a pretty shite ma'am. I had a girl in my class which kept telling lies to make her seem more badass or that she would be living the best life. She always told everybody that she was living on top of a mountain and had to go like 5 kilometers to school every morning by foot. I was actually friends with her, so I went to her house once and she was living in an apartment which was in an alleyway filled with drunkards. She also said that she was part of some group that were basically freelancers and that she would do life-threatening tasks every day. But she also said that it would have to stay a secret even though she basically just screamed it around the whole school. Overall, her stories about that group had so many cliches like that they had a member which was a 12-year-old, which went freaking berserk every time he saw blood because his parents were killed in front of him, and that they had some 12-year-old scientist which apparently built some sort of gun that they'd use on the berserk kid to calm him down. She also said that she had a rival or something because apparently she kept getting followed by a dude that knew her code name, but every time she chased him he would apparently jump on a freaking roof and run off. The stories also had a lot of logic failures. She once told that the group was building gliders for forest missions to jump from tree to tree easier, even though the gliders would be way too wide and they'd just break the wings because it would collide with every possible tree. Once she also told us that the group would have a 12-year-old member that for some reason had access to guns and that he shot a fist-sized hole through her wrist during a training session. She apparently didn't even get medical treatment but instead just put a bandage around half of her arm. But in school she was able to move her arm completely normal and there were never any traces of a wound, not even some blood or something. So nobody ever believed her and she became the most hated of the class. At the end of the year she had to leave the school because her grades were too bad, and she kept telling that it was just because of French and that she would have the best grades of everybody. Even though the truth was that she had a D in almost every class and even multiple E, which can make you leave the school. And here in Germany, by the way, she was also just 12 years old. Sounds like she watched too much anime. What's the most creepily intelligent thing your pet has ever done? I woke up one summer morning to a flooded basement. My dad was yelling at me that I had left the outdoor faucet running, which caused the flood. Spent hours and lots of money cleaning it up. Come to find out, my dog, after watching me use the faucet, figured out how to turn it on. We only found this out because one day my dad heard someone cranking on the faucet, and when he looked into the yard, my boxer's mouth was around the valve, twisting her head like a confused puppy until it turned on. She never did figure out how to turn it off though. Not my pet, but the dog of a farmer in my grandma's town that recently had given birth to puppies. When we were strolling around by the farm we saw the dog and said to her, "Hey, show us your puppies." Next thing we know, the dog ran around the farm and came back with all her cute little puppies and let us play with them. What a wonderful day. That is so sweet and wholesome. My friend's dog knows he's not allowed onto one very specific carpeted area in the house, and he knows never to step onto that area. How does he like to be a smartass about it? He grabs his favorite toy, casually tosses it onto said carpeted area, looks at us, and gives us the "well, my toy's there and I have to step onto the carpet to get it." He does it so slowly and so deliberately that you know he's being a complete smartass about it. I can't help but laugh every time he does it, which is not often. He typically does it when he's desperate for our play because he knows he'll get a laugh and a positive reaction out of it. We had a dog growing up that wasn't allowed at the dinner table to beg for food, so at dinner time he would get as close to the dinner table as possible and turn his back to it and look over his shoulder as we all ate. My dad has always had problems with throwing his back out, and it usually makes him unable to move for several weeks. Anyways, one time when he threw out his back, my dog grabbed a blanket in her mouth and slowly spread it over my dad while he was sleeping. We were all amazed and gave her a treat. We were all amazed and gave her a treat. This sounds like the dog version of everyone clapped and the manager gave me a thumbs up. Except I believe you. Woke me up and brought me outside to under the deck, where he very obviously showed me the cat that got out and was hiding under there. He looked at the cat, then back at me, then at the cat, then back at me. Frick's sake, Larry, I told you not to rat me out. When I was younger I lost a watch that I really loved. Around that time my cat developed a habit of using his front paws to reach under the fridge and just scramble around under there like crazy. He was seriously obsessed and did that for almost a year, until one night he pulled out a tray that had been under the fridge, and on it was my watch. After that he never touched the fridge again. He was a good boy. That cat totally winged it there in the first place. He just wanted it back. My cat is diabetic. About a month ago he had to start insulin twice daily. I have an auto feeder which goes off every 12 hours and gives a proportioned meal. Since I work early in the morning, the first meal goes off at 5 AM. Half an hour after he eats, he gets his insulin. He is a good boy and sits very still while I give him his needle. Every time I tell him good boy and give him a quick once over with his favorite brush. On my day off I forgot to set my alarm for his insulin. At 5:30 he jumped right up on my chest and patted my face ever so gently until I got out of bed. He immediately ran right to the fridge and sat down, where the insulin is, waiting for his first brushing. Good boy knows he is a good boy. I had a diabetic cat, and he'd always get a little lunch meat after his injection. He'd often stay in my lap after the injection, batting the syringe, like we'll totally have more shots for more ham, please. There was a time when, coming back from a trip, the balls of my feet were swollen and it hurt going up and down the stairs. My cat, that little crap, would actually imitate me by limping up and down the stairs, taking the steps one at a time, while meowing pitifully. I swear if he could talk, he would have said something like, "See, this is how stupid you look." That is hilarious and insanely rude. I actually have a story for this. I taught my dog to play hide and seek. I made him sit in the kitchen while I hid a rawhide somewhere in the house. He would then search until he found it and would then bring it back to me. I would then tell him to hide it and he would. One day I was searching for the dang rawhide for like 10 minutes and could not find it. Searched everywhere. Eventually I had to give up, totally confused. Next morning I opened a dresser drawer to get a pair of shorts and there it is. He saw a slightly cracked drawer, dropped it in, closed it, and outsmarted a human. I was very proud. Reminds me of my old dog who used to hide my shoes so I wouldn't leave. After I had left for college, I visited home and on my last day I couldn't find my shoes so I had to go out and buy a new pair. My mom called me that night to tell me she found my shoe inside her acoustic guitar. My cousin had a koi fish pond and 2 dogs. One night the dogs started barking during the middle of the night really loud and urgently, and they almost never bark at anything. My cousin and her parents knew something was weird and went out to check. One of the fish somehow managed to jump out the pond and was flopping around next to the water on the concrete, and one dog was trying to help it back in the water with his nose while the other was barking for my cousin or her parents to help. Once they watched them place the fish in the water, they went back in the kennels to sleep. They would watch the pond a lot from then on. They said those classes in fish herding would never pay off and all he could do was teach, perpetuating the cycle. While at the park playing fetch, my dog spotted a squirrel and took off after it into the woods. I couldn't find her for the life of me, so my mom and I started driving around to look for her and checking our home voicemail every 10 minutes in case someone found her and called the number on her tags. 2 hours go by and we decide to go home to eat before continuing our search. Turns out she walked the 3 miles back home from the park and snuck under the backyard deck and up the deck stairs and was waiting at the back door for us upon our return. That smart bee. Still love her though. My 13 pounds ginger cat always had to be near me. Some of the doors in my house didn't latch, and he learned to open them by using his body as a battering ram. Okay, fine. So one day I'm in a closed room with a door that does latch, and I hear the doorknob rattle. It rattles for a bit then turns, and the cat pops the door open with his weight and saunters in. I miss him. Realizing she can use her nose to open the metal popcorn tin. I watched my Australian Shepherd problem solve how to get her tennis balls that get stuck under the furniture out by taking another tennis ball and rolling it to knock the stuck one out. She seemed very pleased with herself. My dog tried this once, then she had no tennis balls. I was in my closet getting dressed, and my Doberman came, obviously wanting me to follow him. I did, in a hurry, and found my kid with a handful of screws that someone, one of the decorators probably, had left in the bay window. She was about to put them in her mouth. Kid was 2. That was the best dog. Not mine. My mother had 2 cats in Hawaii before I was born. She would tell stories about how one, Epo, was very intelligent, and the other, Popoki, was as dumb as a bag of rocks. Made a great pair. She would talk about how they'd be playing out back and she would call them in for dinner. Epo would immediately show up, but Popoki would be lost in her very small backyard. She would just look at Ippo and say, "Ippo, go get Popoki," and Ippo would run out and guide Popoki into the house and to his food dish so that he could have dinner. Same sort of thing if she had no idea where Popoki was. She would just tell Ippo to find him, and Ippo would go search the house and bring Popoki to her. Rock and a rocking chair. I thought my living room was haunted for weeks. He has to take antibiotics for 10 days. They are pills. In the beginning, I was wondering why he wasn't getting better. Turns out, the butthole was keeping them in his cheek or under his tongue and spitting them out under the closet. So now I hold him until he swallows and then I check his mouth. It's really one of those times I wish I could explain to him why I am torturing him with eye drops and painkillers and whatnot. You are a senior citizen and you have a severe cold. Stop spitting things out. On the other hand, he has never scratched or bitten me, just struggles and pulls away. He is a very sweet cat. Senior citizen made me laugh. It's so much easier to dose cats with liquid meds. They don't really understand how to get the liquid out, so it mostly gets swallowed. One time I took my dog to my parents' house for whatever reason. On the way home I passed by a park with an off-leash dog park, and since he had been so good on our trip and visit, I decided he deserved some time to run around with other dogs. It was a weekday afternoon, so there weren't very many people there, and the people who were there seemed to be good friends. They completely ignored me, and more importantly they ignored my very people-loving dog. None of the other dogs were interested in playing with my dog either, so we took his ball to the far side of the park to play. One toss made the ball bounce out of the grass and into the mulch brush. He ran in after it and I heard a pitiful whimper from him. He came limping out of the brush with one of his front paws held off the ground. I rushed to him and inspected his paw, but I couldn't find any cut or splinter or anything. But I decided that it was time to go. He refused to walk, so I had to carry this 55 pounds idiot back to the car. I distinctly remember him staring at the group of people on our way out, while I struggled to open the gates to get out with him in my arms. We got back to the car and I had to set him down on the ground so I could get the car door open, and he seemed to have no problem putting weight on his injured paw. As soon as I opened the door, he jumped right in and settled into his usual car position. When we got home he was totally fine and showed no signs that his paw was ever bothering him. To this day I believe that he wanted to leave so badly that he faked an injury, and his glare at the group of people was his way of saying frick all of you and your unfriendly dogs. Shame. I wish someone could have at least pet for a minute. If I called my girlfriend at around 9 PM on a Friday, my dog would always get excited and head to the truck. I was stationed in Shanghai for about a year, but lived for years in Thailand with my GF and my dog. Whenever I had a long weekend I'd fly back to Thailand. My dog quickly picked up on the idea that whenever my GF switched from speaking Thai to English, she was talking to me. I would call her when I arrived at the airport on a Friday evening, as it was only about 15 minutes from our home, and she'd come pick me up. My dog was able to put this whole scenario together and went ape crap whenever I called on a Friday evening, and he would immediately head for the truck to go pick me up. When I would call her at other hours of the day, he would look at her like he knew who she was talking to, but he knew that it didn't mean that I was coming home. That's adorable. My boyfriend's Dobby recognizes the sound of my boyfriend's work truck and starts whining and pacing and getting up on the arm of the couch to stare out the window looking for him. Her ears will perk up at the sound of a big diesel truck going down our street, but she doesn't move from her spot unless it's his truck she hears. My cat can open doors. She understands that turning the knob unlatches the door. It takes her a few tries, but she does it all the time now. Getting into the office, where she isn't allowed. I have also found her cat toy stash. I have no idea why, but she hides her favorite toys in a few caches around my apartment. Fake to have a paw injury so I'd carry him around the house. One of my cats used to fake a limp. Everyone was utterly convinced it was real, but I caught him. He was charging up the stairs full tilt. Then he saw me, and limp, and limp. I'm onto you, cat. I went to the toilet and found my cat and they having a crap. I'm surprised he wasn't reading the fricking newspaper. Sometimes my cat and I share special moments in the toilet, during which we're both crapping. What makes it especially special is that he makes eye contact the whole time. Had a budgie, Basil. He was cool. He would always sit on my shoulder and sleep while watching TV. If ever my flatmate and I were chilling on the couch, he would fly from me to her, land on her shoulder, do a crap and then fly back to me. Basil never liked Claire much. My dog once started barking at the door, like someone was about to knock or come in, while I was eating. I got up to see who was there and it was no one. I went back and some of my food was on the ground, being shared by the dog and 2 cats. I think one of the cats knocked some off, so they worked together as a team to steal my food. Dr. Peter Venkman. Human sacrifice. Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria. I had a cat once who knew that to get water from the faucet in the sink she would tap on the handle, not the faucet, and look at me. If she had opposable thumbs she would have turned it herself. Other cats would just look at the faucet and wait. She also would leap on her brother if he started to scratch the edge of the sofa, to get him to stop, knowing it was not allowed. She also not only recognized herself in the mirror, but would use it to groom the hair on her back that she couldn't see otherwise. My dog has epilepsy, so he has to take a pill every morning. I broke it in half and put it in his food and let go at it. Checked a few minutes later and I see the bowl is completely empty except for one of the halves left in the center. I walked into the living room where he was, looked at him and said forget something as a joke. He looked at me, got up, went back to his bowl and ate the pill in front of me. That sucker knows what's up. I put the pill in wet food for my cat. It was antibiotic. I jokingly said you don't even know that I just tricked you to take the medication you need. He stopped eating, looked at me, left a loud meow and went to hide behind the curtain. I jinxed myself. I had to force feed him for the rest of the prescription. The cat is smart. I have a chocolate lab and a black cat. My dog loves tennis balls. My cat doesn't want my dog to be happy, so he would sit on her tennis balls like a chicken hatching an egg. One morning I was getting ready for work and my dog is barking at my cat because he's sitting on her tennis ball. I thought, alright butthole, that's it. And I went to the closet, got 3 cans of tennis balls, opened them and tossed them around the apartment. My cat seemed unmoved as my dog yelped in glee at her newly found fortune. I left for work. When I got back home that evening I hear my dog barking in the dining room. When I get there I see all 10 tennis balls in the corner, guarded by my cat and my dog barking at him. He looked me in the eyes as if to say, frick you, I win again. My cat doesn't want my dog to be happy, not sure why, but this line made me laugh really hard. Not my dog, I have one but he hasn't had any remarkable moment for now, but my neighbor's dog. He is old and frail and neglects him, even though he gave him a place to stay. He used to be a stray. He knows he won't get much food from his owner, if any, so he usually spends his days roaming the neighborhood and going to house. He knows specifically which neighbor will give him food and knows the precise time we all finish lunch. He used to frequent my grandma's house, waiting patiently at the front door for leftovers. If she didn't have any, he would leave with dignity, although he took a crap in my grandma's garden as a revenge once. The most intelligent part though is his ability to sneak outside his fenced yard, and nobody knows how. Even with the gates closed, he would suddenly appear outside or inside. Once, I watched him closely as he was walking home, to make sure I could see him. However, suddenly he stopped and looked at me, never breaking eye contact. I had to sneeze, and by the time I could look back at him, 3 freaking seconds, he was back in his yard. The sucker was clever to take the opportunity. He also is aware of the concept of traffic lights and pedestrian crosses over roads, as I've witnessed him multiple times waiting patiently for his light to turn green so he could pass the street, and knows to look for cars anytime he has to cross on an unmarked area. My dog was kinda just trotting alongside me when he got an itch on his butt. Without stopping his run, he reached his head all the way back and started nibbling the itchy spot. So for about 10 paces, his back feet were running forward and his front feet were running backward. Jesus, that's some athleticism. That's like dribbling between your legs and doing Cirque du Soleil. My brother was sitting at the table eating cake when he hears our dog barking at the front door. He gets up to check it out, usually means someone is about to ring the doorbell, and then our dog sprints back to the unsupervised cake and eats it all in one bite. So I have this cat, Chairman Meow. He had to go live at my parents' because I was in the Navy and my ship was deploying, and they started letting him go out and come in as he pleased, which I was totally in favor of. He was getting chubby as an apartment cat. Then my mom started to notice something weird. Now, for context, she's in her 60s and had just retired. My dad was still working for another year or two, with me and my brother grown and moved out. There was a lot of time home alone for her. Not that she didn't go out or have hobbies, but that's beside the point. What she noticed is that sometimes she'd let the cat out, then 10 minutes later he'd walk by inside. She started worrying that she was having blackouts, or suffering from something with early onset in the name or something. It was happening often enough that she started keeping paper logs. Then one day she went down to the finished basement for the first time in a while, and stepped into a horror film. Like I said, my brother and I had moved out, and the basement was carpeted etc. But it was mostly being used to store stuff, including, apparently, blood. Lots of blood, staining the carpet, dripping down a wall, in the ceiling. She even found a pile of entrails. Turns out what was happening was, the cat had gotten up in the suspended ceiling, and found a loose brick in the foundation. He'd worked it loose. Being a cat, he still demanded humans serve him by opening the door, but he could go in and out as he pleased also, and he was bringing his trophies back into the basement. The entrails I mentioned, on closer inspection, it was a rabbit. Well, half a rabbit, and that's how my cat made my mom think she was losing her mind. I have a blind, born with fricked up eyes, 150 pounds of solid muscle, American bulldog. He loves everyone. If he hears a new voice, the love wiggles begin. He is just a huge liver dog, sleeps with my 4-year-old every night, gets along with my cats and other dogs, just a giant sweetheart. Well, a work buddy of mine gave me a ride home once, invited him in for a bit. We walk in, my pup starts his love wiggles, and stops, ears full, tail droops. His expression changes from his usual happy-go-lucky self into the dog he looks like, a vicious monster. Well, he bares his teeth, starts growling at my buddy, and when my son walked into the room, he went nuts. He lunged at my buddy, snarling, teeth bared. WTF. He never acts like this, ever. I was so confused and embarrassed. My buddy leaves. I scold my pup. Life goes on. Fast forward a few months and it turns out the buddy of mine from work is arrested for possession of kitty pee. My blind beast who loves everyone somehow knew to hate this guy. He instinctively disliked him, and when my son came into the room, he went into protect mode and tried to get the guy. Creepy stuff. My cat, Tuffy, stole a piece of bread off of the stove and put it in the floor next to the cabinet. She then stared at it intensely and motionlessly for an hour. We thought that was creepy. Then a mouse came out from behind the cabinet to get the bread and she pounced it. She was using the bread as motherfucking bait. This is the same cat who routinely burns her tongue licking light bulbs, hisses at them, and keeps licking. Genius. But the light bulb thing reminds me why we never have candles in the house. Our old black and white cat would be mesmerized by them, creeping closer and closer to the flame, and then burned his whiskers. He didn't learn, so the next time we had a flame, he did it again. No more candles in our house. Had a cat I had a rudimentary system of communication with. When she was hungry, she'd walk into the room and sort of lick her lips if you will, flicking her tongue in and out a few times, and I'd then follow her to the kitchen. She also always wanted to claim my computer chair for herself, but I wouldn't let her sit on it. So one day she comes in my bedroom, licks her lips, turns towards the door, and as I get up to follow her, she gave a little triumphant chirp, whipped round at the speed of light and jumped on my now vacant chair, then curled up in the middle and proceeded to groom her fur while looking very pleased with herself. I was tricked by a cat. Edit. Other examples of boopity boop's intelligence. I didn't get her. She got me. My windows don't open up. They open outwards, and Boop one day figured out she could jump up on a little ledge outside, then reach up like a human doing a pull-up and heave herself up and in through the window. I'd only seen her in my front garden and occasionally said hello to her until the day she decided to just invite herself in. Because my windows would be closed at night, if she was inside and wanted to go out, she would wake me up by coming into my bedroom and using her paws to bat my shoes together until the noise woke me up. When I later adapted to that noise and was able to sleep through it, she took to jumping on the bed and pouncing on my exposed toes with her claws repeatedly until I got up. She relentlessly tried to teach me how to hunt. She would bring mice in virtually every single day, alive and unharmed, and then release them and have me help her track them down and catch them. Once, when I caught the mouse and went out the front door and put it outside, I came back in to be greeted by a facial expression like I was the most stupid creature she'd ever laid eyes on. She then hopped out the window and came back in a moment later with the same mouse. We developed a hunting game we played a few times a week where she would attack my arm if I jiggled my fingers a certain way. When her grabbing, kicking, scratching and biting became too much, she would release my arm as soon as I said, "Can I have my hand back please?" Boop. I later learned from her previous owners they had seen around over the couple of years after she moved in with me, but she would purposefully turn her tail on them and ignore them. She gave a little triumphant chirp. Holy crap, that worked. I had friends round and one of them brought fudge. Cats were interested but got chased off it a couple of times. They wait for attention to shift to something else. Little cat goes into the middle of the group of friends, acts all cute, causes a distraction, while bigger cat gets on the table, knocks down the fudge. Little cat quietly moves on and then joins her brother eating fudge. Proper teamwork that not only used their individual strengths but exploited our weaknesses. Impressed. The bigger cat whored out the little cat to get some fudge. When I lived with my ex, we got a cat that would occasionally come make pitifully adorable tiny mews outside my bedroom door, where my computer was, when she wanted attention. Usually it was 50/50 wanting to be cuddled or wanting me to shake the food bowl so she couldn't see the bottom. One time she sounded a lot more urgent than usual. I went and opened the door and she ran off. Okay, not cuddles. I followed her down the stairs and she turned left into the dining room instead of right into the kitchen where her food was. Okay, what's up? She went to the middle of the floor and sat down, staring at a window. Took me a couple of seconds to realize the bird feeder usually suction cup to the outside was missing and she was very distressed about it. I went outside and put it back on the window, and she jumped on the stool by the window to watch me do it. When I went back and I walked back into the dining room, she looked over her shoulder at me, then jumped down, ran over, rubbed against my legs for a few seconds, then went back and jumped back on the stool again, waiting for birds to show up. That is freaking adorable. My cat pooped in our toilet once. He didn't flush though. There's actually a lot of people that train their cats to use the toilet rather than a litter box, and there's tons of info on the web about it. I don't know if it's creepy as such, but it's very intuitive. I've struggled with depression and CPTSD for years, and every morning as my husband leaves for work he tells the dogs goodbye, and he tells my dog, an Australian Kelpie called Sterling, to look after me. His border collie ex, Daphne, can't be told to do anything so she doesn't give a crap, but wherever I am, Sterling makes sure to watch me. If I'm inside the house, he will pick the spot on the veranda that is closest to where I am in the house. If I'm gardening or in the chicken coop, he is never far away. When I hand out the laundry to dry, he sits at my feet. When I ride my horses out on trails, he's only a few steps behind. Even when Daphne gets bored and goes home to cause trouble. But if my husband is home, Sterling takes a day off and will do the obnoxious stuff that Daphne delights in every day. It's as if he feels he does not need to protect me when my husband is home. With how intuitive Sterling is about you, it might be worth considering training him to be a psychiatric service dog. That intuition isn't something that can be taught. Posted this before, not exactly creepy but more dang they're smarter than we realize. Big kind off in a good way, used to live in a house with a long driveway, like approx 1/8 of a mile. Neighbor had a similar driveway right next to ours. I had 2 dogs, neighbors had some as well. Both sets of dogs and fences pretty far apart. As far as I know the 2 groups never met. This will matter later. Neighbors kept their dogs almost exclusively outside. Kept mine almost exclusively inside. Had a doggy door and they basically only went out for bathroom. We'd sit in the den with the dogs all the time and hear the neighbors' dogs bark. My dogs wouldn't react 95% of the time. Wouldn't even lift their ears heads. Would be like it wasn't happening. But if we could hear it, obviously they could. But in the 5% of times they would react, Invariably it was because someone was driving down my long driveway to our house. Always. Without fail. Either a package or a friend visiting, didn't matter. My dogs would react to their dogs barking a certain way that meant someone's coming to your house, not mine. And once we realized it was happening, we pretty extensively tested it. Saw multiple examples of their dogs barking for someone visiting on their driveway and our dogs ignoring it. So not just a bark that means someone's approaching, but differentiation between driveways that were side by side. That, my friends, seems a pretty sophisticated form of communication for completely random. But this reminds me of the Twilight bark in 101 Dalmatians. My cat was sitting on the front porch sunning herself one day, and my dad walks outside to do some yard work. He tells her to make herself useful and go catch a mouse or something, and walks off. My mom confirmed she heard my dad say this through the open window near the porch. A short while later, my dad is passing through the front yard and sees the cat laying in the grass with her front legs outstretched in front of her. Upon closer inspection, she's got something clamped between her front paws. It was a mouse. I think I remember reading once that cats can actually understand human commands way better than dogs. They just don't care. Not a pet, but I recall as a kid, we were playing treasure hunts. The clue had me in an area with a phone box and a few bushes. There was a cute black and white cat nearby, and for the crake, I asked the cat, "Where's the next clue?" And no word of a lie, the cat looked at the bush and appeared to nod towards it. Checked the bush and indeed, there was the next clue. That cat has lived in my memory for around 20 years now. My cat would not get up from my godfather's chest 2-3 months before he died from breast cancer. My cat randomly started peeing into the toilet. No one ever taught her. I just heard trickling in the bathroom one day and, upon investigating, found her squatting on the seat. She was very confused when there was nothing for her to scratch over, though. This happened twice that I witnessed, but after that we moved and she does not seem to have picked it up with the toilet in the new place. My dog would escape the house at night, stroll to a nearby cafe and beg for food before coming back in the morning, sitting outside the gate smiling like an idiot while we opened it. We only found out about his exploits because someone eventually brought him back from the cafe. He would know when to cross roads also, as he never got hit once. Eventually he became senile and would wait outside the wrong house, so we just made extra sure to keep him indoors. Before anyone says my family is crap at keeping animals because he keeps running, we do walk them twice a day. He's just an extremely inquisitive creature who loves food. He knew the route because that's where we walk him and was always learning how to escape. Whether it be undoing a door latch, squeezing through places we thought was impossible, or climbing. I had a really bad day and was in my room crying. My cockatiel Stormageddon started screaming from his cage, so I got him out. He jumped onto my shoulder and put his head on my cheek and started saying "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay" over and over again. I say that to him when he freaks out in his cage at night time. A car honks a horn outside and he starts screaming and flapping his wings. I didn't realize he could tell I was sad and say it back to me to comfort me like I comfort him, let alone say it at all. We had a parrot who did like the evil version of this. He would bite you then say "No, stop it, ouch." Once he followed up by laughing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.